But anyway, so thank you all. Since we are really pressed for time, this session one has only an hour and 10 minutes. So without further ado, let me just get straight to the session. Although I'd like to, of course, thank Professor Joe and AKS, as well as KASPM, 한국대중음악학회, and Dr. Kyung Lee, and Dr. Kwon for putting this together almost at the last minute. So because of the time zone difference and dispersal of all these researchers, across the Pacific, we don't really have coherent theme for any of these sessions. So this is going to be sort of I guess, cutting edge, research topics that all these, researchers of Korean popular music are currently engaged. So in session one, we have three speakers, and I will introduce them one by one as their presentation progresses. So the very first one is by Dr. Donna Kwon. So let me just introduce Dr. Kwon, and then she will proceed and then give us our presentation. Dr. Donna Lee Kwon is professor of ethnomusicology at the University of Kentucky and serves as the coordinator for the Division of Musicology and Ethnomusicology. Dr. Kwon is serving a second term on the Society of Ethnomusicology Council and has served 2 terms as president of the Association for Korean Music Research. She is the author of 2 books. The first one is Music in Korea, Experiencing Music, Expressing Culture, which was published as part of the Global Music series of Oxford University Press in 2011. And more recently, Stepping in the Madang, Sustaining Expressive Ecologies of Korean Drumming and Dance, which was published by Wesleyan University Press in 2024. So without further ado, let's give a big hand to Dr. Kwon.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll share my presentation here. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Just get some windows to the side here. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me? Yes?
But I think we are seeing your screen, which is also with showing the script.
Oh, okay. Let me try this again.
Yeah, in the meantime, let me address that each presenter will have 15 minutes, again, because of the time constraint. And I would encourage, the audience to use the chat window, to put their questions while the presentations are ongoing. Okay, so we will collect those questions, and hopefully we will have a Q&A session at the end of all the presentations.
Okay, is this set better now? Actually, I can't see you anymore. Well, just let me know if there's any problems. Oh, okay. I think I can see you. All right. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this event. Today, I'd like to talk to you about one of the most recognizable, but also one of the least studied features of contemporary K-pop production, namely the extensive use of auto-tune and other vocal processing technologies. Although autotune has become nearly ubiquitous in popular music production, surprisingly little scholarship has examined how it functions within K-pop beyond simple pitch correction. In this presentation, I argue that the stylistic use of autotune and vocoder in the music of ATEEZ is much more than a production effect. Rather, it functions as an important component of the group's sonic identity and transmedia storytelling. Specifically, I argue that these processed voices contribute to ATEEZ's construction of posthuman identities, reinforce the group's science fiction-inspired narrative universe, and participate in broader global sonic imaginaries. Whether used for pitch correction, stylistic effect, or to simulate robotic posthuman alterities, plugins such as autotune and vocoder permeate the discography of the boy band ATEEZ. I argue that the stylistic use of autotune and vocoder effects is part of ATEEZ's signature multivocal sound and can be interpreted as integral to their concept. ATEEZ is well known for having a highly developed lore that embraces elements of science fiction, pirate themes, and fantasy, in which a group of 8 men navigate between alternate selves and worlds. Before continuing, I'd like to briefly situate autotune within contemporary popular music. Autotune was introduced by Ontaris Audio in 1997 as a tool for pitch correction. At moderate settings, listeners often don't notice it. However, when the retune speed is increased dramatically, it produces the highly recognizable electronic vocal effect popularized by artists like Cher and later T-Pain. Closely related is the vocoder, which operates somewhat differently by using the human voice to shape synthesized sounds, creating what many listeners perceive as a robotic or cybernetic vocal quality. It is used to run the sound of a voice through a synthesizer and has been used famously by Laurie Anderson and many others to create a robotic vocal sound, such as Daft Punk, in the music of Daft Punk. And this is kind of what the original vocoder looked like there on the right, but now it's used a lot just through various plugins to get that effect. These technologies have become standard across global pop music, but they also carry cultural meanings. Scholars have argued that autotune signifies hypermodernity, globalization, and changing ideas about vocal authenticity. Rather than asking whether autotune represents a lack of authenticity or hypermodern creativity, this paper asks a different question. What kinds of identities and worlds do these technologies create? I don't have time to go into this in depth, but here's just a quick snapshot of the history of autotune in K-pop. And just briefly note, it's been around for a long time in K-pop. Probably the peak year was 2009 with the incredibly catchy songs such as SHINee's Ring Ding Dong, Super Junior Sorry Sorry, and 21's debut song Fire. So I'm going to just keep going because I actually have 5 minutes less than I thought I did. ATEEZ provides an ideal case study because they have one of the most elaborate narrative universes in contemporary K-pop, and their use of autotune and other vocal effects is extensive. Since debuting 2018, the group has developed an interconnected story spanning albums, music videos, diary entries, promotional films, and live performances and videos. Within this narrative, the members confront authoritarian forces, android guardians, alternate versions of themselves, and recurring themes of freedom, expressing emotions, and resistance. Importantly, I suggest that the music itself participates in this storytelling, not only through lyrics, but also through the sound of the voices themselves. Central to this universe are multiple parallel worlds, particularly World A and the dystopian World Z on the right. World A is more like the real world, and World Z represents a dystopian alternate world in which humans live longer while under the control of cyborgian technology, as well as a crew of giant android guardians and their leader called Z. This project draws on 4 overlapping theoretical perspectives. The first is posthumanism, provides a way of thinking about technologically mediated voices not as artificial substitutes for human expression, but as voices that blur the boundary between human and machine. Hales's concept of the flickering signifier is especially useful because it reminds us that these processed voices don't have fixed meanings. They shift depending on musical and narrative context. Second, I build on Catherine Meisel's work on multivocality, which suggests that vocalists express agency in multiple ways. At the same time, she sees multivocality as simultaneously produced by neoliberal forces, in this case, the K-pop industry. Rather than hearing autotune as simply inauthentic or limiting, I argue that ATEEZ uses it to multiply vocal identities, narrative selves, and reinforce themes and narratives across their discography. Third, scholars such as Simon Reynolds and Catherine Provenzano encourage us to think about autotune as a global sonic technology associated with modernity and transnational popular music. Provenzano writes that the dynamics of autotune are also very highly gendered and racialized. Fourth, drawing on Kyung Kim's application of Edouard Glissant's concept of opacity, I argue that these processed voices create a kind of post-human and even racial opacity, allowing ATEEZ to move fluidly across different global sonic traditions without settling into a single identity. A fifth framework that is implicit throughout the paper is transmedia storytelling. Music is one component of a larger narrative universe that includes albums, MVs, etc., as well as fan interpretation. I hope to emphasize that the sound of the voice itself should also be understood as part of transmedia world building. Taken together, these frameworks allow us to hear autotune not simply as studio technology, but as narrative technology that produces identity, world building, and post-human meaning. For this project, I listened systematically through ATEEZ's discography from 2018 through the current Golden Hour series. I identified more than 39 songs employing clearly audible stylistic autotune or other prominent forms of vocal processing. Among these, 21 songs feature vocal effects that evoke post-human or non-human voices. As I analyzed these tracks, a typology of 4 recurring categories of processed vocality emerged. Rather than functioning randomly, these vocal types consistently align with particular narrative situations and emotional states within ATEEZ's fictional universe. Among these, 21 songs feature vocal effects that evoke post-human or non-human voices. These are some of them here in the slide. Rather than functioning randomly, these vocal types consistently align with particular narrative situations and emotional states within ATEEZ's fictional universe. I should mention that these post-human voices are often created through the addition of other effects besides autotune or vocoder, such as reverb, chorus, and more importantly, pitch, formant, and tempo modulation. In listening closely to these songs, I discovered that there are 4 types here. So the first and most common is the low distorted voice. Which often represents the android guardians, authoritarian control, etc. The second one is a high-pitched robotic voice. This is often evokes altered consciousness, heightened emotion, even humor. And the third is the vocoder voice. Unlike the first category, this voice frequently appears during transitions between worlds or altered states of consciousness. It can also create the impression of an anonymous collective speaking together. Finally, I identified a 4th category consisting of rough, heavily distorted voices. These appear during moments of crisis, revolution, emotional excess, or dramatic transformation. Rather than simply making the singer sound robotic, each vocal type performs distinct narrative functions. The first type that consists of the low distorted vocals is by far the most common method of singing the post-human and occurs in 16 of the 21 songs and can be heard across the Treasure, Fever, The World, and Golden Hour series. In the Answer MV and the outro Long Journey, which are the first and last tracks in the Treasure epilogue, Action to Answer, album, we get one of the first strong hints as to who this low voice signifies in the ATEEZ lore. One can also see and hear it very clearly in this Treasure epilogue, Action to Answer, outro Long Journey. And then in the monologue set to music, the ATEEZ leader or captain Hong Jung says heroically, "Let us continue to hope and yearn. We are the history and we will be the one." But then his tone changes as he says, "Can you hear those voices?" Followed by a sinister laugh. In the trailer, we see a suited figure clad in white with a glimpse of silver chains, masking part of his face as we hear these low, moaning voices singing in a robotic descending pattern. So I'll just play this real quickly. And can someone tell me how much time I have? Because I don't know why it's not showing up. Okay. Oh, I know why.
Give you about five more minutes.
Okay. And that figure is the android guardian. In Halazia, the contrast between Yeosang's processed lower robotic vocal and Jong-ho's comparative natural tenor becomes dramatically meaningful. The processed voice is associated with oppression and technological control, while Jong-ho's unprocessed voice symbolizes emotional resistance and the possibility of overturning the existing order. So let me play this really quickly.
소리를 잃은 작은 파랑새야 속삭임이 들려오는구나 시작되는 깊은 울림 세상을 뒤집을 목소리
or less processed, I guess I should say. Okay. The counterpart to this low posthuman voice is the higher pitched, sometimes sped up voice that sounds like a robot. It can be a warped child, a toy, or even a bird. And this sound is less frequent. It occurs 6 times. Here, I'll just show you the one that occurs in bouncy, and this is like a kind of a parrot that mimics the chorus here.
Slow it down, I can show you right now 우리 만들지 bouncy 우리부터 fly
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. There's a lot to say about this video. Okay, the next category I will address is the vocoder voice, which appears in 6 of the 16 songs. And again, since I don't really have time, I'll just play it real quickly. This is where it has a little bit more of a chorus effect to it. Okay, so basically it's kind of as if you're hearing from their perspective as someone who might hear it if they were still under the spell of mind control. And then interspersed you hear Jong-ho's voice, he's sort of like the voice of humanity, kind of breaking through the mind control. Okay, so the fourth and last category consists of a more rough and distorted combination of sounds, most likely produced with a combination of effects. In This World, the song This World, you can hear these rough, distorted voices take over the song's middle section in these kind of robotic chanting. So play this really quickly and then switch, go to the conclusion. Okay. Okay, I'm going to skip these other findings here and then my conclusions here. So one of the most interesting aspects of this project is that ATEEZ ultimately complicates common assumptions about autotune. Critics often argue that heavily processed vocals reduce authenticity or erase human expression. However, within ATEEZ's music, the opposite frequently occurs. The technological voice becomes capable of expressing fear, hope, humor, resistance, interiority, vulnerability, and transformation. The boundary between human and machine becomes intentionally blurred, producing what Catherine Hales describes as a flickering signifier. Rather than replacing humanity, technology expands the expressive possibilities of the voice. So in conclusion, the posthuman, robotic, and superhuman voices in ATEEZ's discography prove far more multivocal, creative, and complex than initially anticipated, even within a single song. Part of the pleasure of listening to ATEEZ lies in hearing how each member's voice is produced differently, creating a dense multivocal palette. Listening closely reveals that each member's voice is weighted toward a particular combination of tailored effects. Mingi's voice, for instance, is often heavily auto-tuned to emphasize the raw power of his rapping, while Jong-ho's soaring tenor remains comparatively less produced, positioning it as a signifier of humanity's power. Finally, although the prevalence of autotune, vocoder, and other posthuman effects might seem to reinforce a techno-orientalist framing of Asians as technologically advanced and robotic, ATEEZ's lore directly resists this framing. The crux of their story concerns the fight to save humanity from cyborgian control so that all humans can fully express their emotions through their art. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. From the Zoom chat. So recording has been resumed. So while the conference room in those who are in the conference room, are gathering together to ask some questions, and I'll ask maybe Dr. Kwon or Professor Ildong can collect those questions there. Why don't we start with the first question in the chat window? Just for the record, I will read this question from Ethan Waddell to, Donna Kwon. The question is, I wonder, do you find that auto-tune vocoder has an impact on the lyrical language being conveyed through the posthuman voice? Also, are there trends in terms of instrumental arrangements and sound supporting the auto-tune vocoder vocal sections? So, Dr. Kwon?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Yeah, I would say it definitely has an impact on the lyrical language. In some cases, it does kind of distort the words somewhat, especially like in that fourth category where it's a little bit more rough and distorted. Um, uh, but so yeah, I would definitely say that there is an impact there. It's not really something I looked too deeply into, and I also wondered with your question, like, does it happen more when they're singing in Korean versus English? And anyway, that's something that I thought about. That yeah, I'll definitely take that feedback and kind of look back into that. Um, and then in terms of, are there trends in terms of instrumental arrangements and sounds? Uh, there probably are, I would say. I think that I was kind of looking back at my chart, and I think that the songs that are like very, very intense and they're really densely arranged and very high energy, I think you'll tend to see a lot more effects in some of those songs. Like looking at my chart, I guess like songs like Hala Hala, The Leader's Propaganda, uh, Wake Up, Bouncy. A lot of these have like tons of effects in there. Like some of them have like all category or like three categories of these effects that I looked at. So I think songs that are like super processed in general and just very dense, I think tend to have more of these effects in them anyway. So I guess that's one thing I can say. Some of the effects like vocoder, if it's used in a more like calming, collective sort of way, then sometimes the arrangements, instrumental arrangements, are pretty um, uh, transparent, I guess. They're a little bit not as dense and crazy. So I guess that's one thing I noticed.
Thank you. So, is there any question from the floor at the conference room? If not at the moment, we can move on to the second question, the chat window, and actually a question from Dr. Donna Kwon to Dr. Moody. So, Donna, would you like to read the question yourself, or?
Sure. Okay. So I would just love to hear more about the Juche vocalization. Like, what is it? How would you define it? And then my second question was kind of about Morambong, the Morambong group, because I had been following them initially a lot on YouTube, and I mean, from my perspective, and I didn't research them, so I don't know for sure. But my perspective is that they were promoted a lot in the beginning, and they were very flashy, and they had like really short hemlines and a lot of bantak bantak sequins and everything. And I kind of felt like, oh, are they kind of promoting them as sort of the counterpart to this popularity of K-pop that's going on? And maybe this matches like what you talk about in terms of cosmopolitanism, but then it seemed like they disappeared. And so I'm just curious, did something happen? I'm just curious what your perspective on that is. I mean, it seems like at the very least there was a shift in terms of what they wanted Morambong to be.
Peter, you're mute. You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kwon, for two very big questions. In the interest of time, I mean, it's an honor to receive a question from you, but in the interest of time, I'll try to give a short answer now, and perhaps I can email you and discuss later more in more detail. So with Juche vocalization, there's not a lot of the textual evidence and references to Juche voice is hard to find. And so it's been passed down through training practices. It wasn't really written about until Kim Jong-il wrote about it in the 80s and 90s, from my understanding. Uh, some outside voices kind of attribute Juche vocalization to Sodosori, indigenous Northwest Korean music, erroneously, in my opinion. There was just around the mid 1960s, all of a sudden there was an opera, a national opera at the time, a Chunyeongjang, where the vocalization was completely different than previous ones, and I believe Hwang Soo-bok was the most consequential figure behind it. Juche vocalization um, is described as soft, silky, evenly produced, feel strained, intelligible to a mass audience. This is kind of basic. What I see is origins of this from a recording of Arirang, and by Hwang Soo-bok herself. And if you look at if you listen to the recording of Chunyeongjang, that national opera in the mid 1960s, the resemblances between this and the lead actress are just very striking. And on the subject of Moranbong Band, yes, it is true that they disappeared for the most point of 2020. And this was the same time as the COVID pandemic. It's also the same time with the passage of the anti-reactionary culture law that was passed that year. So the girl groups, for the most part, went away. And instead of girl groups being the center of North Korean popular music culture, there are these big elaborate groups, but there still was girl group dance ensembles that were nameless subsidiaries under the large scale music performance groups. But instead of music that was electronic strings and girl group dances, inspired dances, there was a move more towards ballads, love ballads, but musically, but with lyrics that supported the party. So yeah, North Korean music is continually evolving. I believe there was a reunion concert of Moranbong in the last few years, but they're not the center of North Korean popular music culture currently.
Okay, any questions from the floor? We have about a minute or two left, and you can actually ask questions in Korean if you'd like.
I have one question to Dr. Moody. So I guess I'm wondering, like, based on your musical examples and videos, I'm wondering what's the distinction between national music and national performing arts, like in the DPRK context.
That's a good question. I think they're virtually the same. And could you say in Korean what two terms you're mentioning on? Because sometimes state is translated as national. So I just wanted to make sure. What are the two terms in
I
Korean
think
that you're?
right. What I was talking about was music versus performing arts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So performing arts would be a broader category that would be inclusive of dance as well as music and as well as and drama. But yeah, I mean, I think if you look institutionally, the national arts are part of the national music is just a branch of the national arts. And so a lot of the developments that I trace in the context of music can be observable through other national arts, performance or otherwise.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think I was mistaken. So we have actually more than well, 5 minutes according to the timetable, but I guess we can extend it for 5 more minutes, so about 10 minutes of more discussion. Any questions from the floor or on the Zoom? Why don't I ask question to Sonong? So the enunciation of ararang rather than arirang. I don't really know much about the historical research on arirang, and I understand there's a lot. Basically, in Korea, I think there is a scholarly archive on arirang and what may be dubbed as arirangology or something, but so Ararang, that kind of refrain exists alongside Arirang, and how far does it go back?
Yeah, so there are so many sources of origins about how much like far we can go back about Arirang, but there are many variants, Arirang variants, and then some scholars would argue that Kinari, Arari, or those all, like the terms can also refer to the origin of Arirang. But my point about here was particularly Ararang is actually for the love song. It means love song, and then that's what Alice Fletcher actually wrote in her handwriting. And the way how um, Anna, Anna Thomas Smith wrote an article about their recording arrangement in 1896 was that she mentioned these three students singing was Korean nursery rhymes instead of love song or um instead of like folk tunes. Actually, like it wasn't promoted as folk, but because apparently those students were elitists, and then they were actually the privileged positions who were sent to Japan be the late 19th century to study, with the government money, and then they were actually afraid to come to be called again back to Korea when Gojong actually fled to Russia. Because like Koreans' sovereignty kind of was really weakening. So I think my point is, like all of these historical contexts, like I think it's really incredible that they used the earliest recording that is documented in the world. But the fact that maybe more of historical search about how to connect this theme to their idea about what their music is, I'm not criticizing or like overthrowing entire their ideas, but the reason in this capitalistic industry, how this kind of historical source has been used for promoting their product is based on my analysis, and I thought trans-historical connection is there because of the Seokwangbom's reformist enlightenment to adapt to Japanese technologies and Western technologies. And then he literally was the one who sentenced the death penalty to Jeon Bong-jun, who was the Donggak Nongmin peasant movement's like the leader. And then they fled to, after the failure of Kapshin Jeongmyeon, they kind of fled to Japan. He fled to Japan and he moved to the United States. And then, apparently he was really politically kind of right wing who wanted to overthrow the king's authority, but then also rule the country or nation. But then he failed, and then he went to the United States. But he's recording. He was arranging this recording, and then it is incredible that there is the earliest recording. But I'm just not sure whether this can be considered as a folk tune. Or this can be, like related to what we know as arirang, which normally symbolizes peace, identity, unification, and Korean kind of egalitarian view. So this is what I discovered based on the impresarios who arranged the recordings, between two. So it's kind of new developments in my ideas when I was doing research for this actually conference. Yeah. I'd love to hear any other thoughts or pushback against my ideas and or like help me articulate better or think about different situations.
Thank you, Sano. Any other questions before we wrap up and take a group photo as suggested by the
Yes.
hosts?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I think before we wrap up this session, how about taking a group photo to commemorate
But
this momentous occasion? So yeah, I
should,
for
sure, we'll
yeah,
do
yeah.
that. But are there any questions from the floor, Dr. Kwon? Dr.
Oh
Kwon,
yeah,
Kwon 선생님?
yeah. 네네. Yeah, I'll be grateful. Yeah, if you could turn on your camera. So yeah, we would like to take a screenshot first, and then take a group photo, including everyone here in the room, as well as those joining us on Zoom. Yeah, hybrid photo. So
Okay, I
yeah,
take it as there's no more questions from the floor.
yeah.
Can I have one, please?
Okay.
It's a short one. 한국말로 할게요.
Yeah.
그 김선홍 선생님한테 질문하고 싶은 게 있는데,
네.
발표 중에 그 BTS 아리랑 발표 중에 혹시 그 BTS 다큐멘터리 리턴이라는 거 혹시 보셨나요?
네, 봤습니다.
네.
2010년도에 제작한 건가요? 아니면 올해 제작한 거 말씀하신 건가요?
올해 나온
네네.
그때 BTS 컴백을 기념해서 동시에 나온 다큐멘터리인데, 거기 보면은 새로운 앨범의 창작 프로세스가 굉장히 자세하게 나와 있어요. 그리고 이 BTS 멤버들과, 그러니까 BTS가 계속 그 이전부터 가져온 이미지가 셀프 서피션트 밴드, 스스로 작곡하고 노래하고 모든 것을 기획하고, 그런데 그 다큐멘터리를 보면 전혀 그렇지 않다라는 것이, 그러니까 BTS가 회사 측에 혹은 방시혁의 제안들에 대해서 뭐 일부 저항도 하고 그랬지만 결국에는 모든 것을 억셉트하고, 그러니까 아리랑이라는 컨셉트, 그리고 아리랑이 얼마나 긴 분량으로 어떤 샘플이 배경에 깔릴 것인가도 전부 다 방시혁의 요구대로 관철이 됐다라는 얘기죠. 요런 부분들이 또 문제가 되는 건 뭐냐면, 그러니까 아리랑에 대해서 사실 우리 뭐 그 국내외를 불문하고 오늘 이 짧은 세션에도 아리랑을 벌써 수차례 들었어요. 그 정도로 좀 아리랑이라는 노래가 좀 한국의 음악 문화를 얘기할 때 좀 과잉 노출되는 경향이 있지 않나 하는 생각이 들고, 물론 그 상징적 가치의 크기는 제가 충분히 이해를 합니다만, 그러는 과정에서 수많은 의미들이 거기에 같이 결합하고, 그래서 아주 복잡한 의미체로 형성이 되는데, 방금 그 BTS의 아리랑을 이야기할 때는 방금 말씀드린 그런 어떤 그 산업 내 내부 폴리틱이라든가 이런 또 그 크리에이티브 오토노미를 둘러싼 어떤 권력 투쟁, 이런 것들도 있을 거고요. 그 다음에 BTS 아리랑에 대해서 제가 그러니까 국내에서는 굉장히 신랄한 비판들이 많았어요. 뭐 해외에서도 마찬가지고. 요거를 제가 사실 지금 이거 한국말로 말씀을 드리는 게, 이게 지금 제 영어로 제대로 번역할 자신이 없어서 얘기를 하는데, 사실 가장 제가 인상적으로 들었던 그 비판 중에 하나는 제가 가르친 학생한테서 나왔거든요. 그 20대 젊은 여학생이었는데 뭐라고 얘기를 했냐 하면, 5060을 거친 계저씨들의 북봉잔치라고 얘기를 하더라고요. 그리고 방시혁이 그 자신의 아이디어를 BTS의 멤버들에게 푸시할 때 주장했던 것도 그런 거였어요, 사실. 전 세계 오디언스가 아리랑을 떼창하는 모습을 난 한번 보고 싶다. 아리랑이라는 것이 어떻게 그 말씀하신 그런 그 역사적 과정을 거쳐서 지금은 일종의 국뽕의 상징처럼 되어 있고 그것에 한없이 그 도취하고 싶은 사람들이 많이 존재하고 한국 내에는 특히 그 이른바 개저씨들이라고 하는 사람들이 그러니까 BTS의 아리랑에는 분명 그런 요소가 존재하는데 그런 부분들도 조금 고려가 되었으면 좋지 않았을까 하는 생각이 듭니다. 예.
근데 제가 발표한 부분이 딱 그런 부분이었습니다. 그러니까
예, 예.
BTS가 이제 방시혁의 이제 입김이 많이 세고 근데 방시혁의 그런 이제 팽창하려고 하는 그 야심이 굉장히 개혁적이고 급진적으로 나타나는데 사실 그 사람이 말하는 그 관점과 그다음에 이 서강범이 개혁하려고 했던 급진적인 그 굉장히 우파적인 생각 같은 이제 그때는 개화파라고 하지만 어쨌든 혁신을 해야 한다는 개화파의 정신과 굉장히 비슷하게 맞닿아져 있는 비전이다라고 제가 해석한 것이거든요. 그래서 지금 말씀하시는 부분이 다 제 논문 제가 발표하는 곳에 반영이 된 것 같습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. By the way, but this is just a joke, but we talked a little bit about BTS in the earlier workshop in July, and I think we should be careful about criticizing them in public because they are so litigious. I heard, but there we go. We just did that. In any case, if there is no further questions, then we will wrap up this session and go into break, which will start with the group photo. So I'd like to thank everyone, the three presenters and the audience, and then we'll go on to take a group photo. So please, Dr. Hyun-Kwon, take away.
Oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll be grateful if you could turn on your camera. Okay, as I said before. Okay, yeah. So yeah, we like to take a screenshot first. Okay, so shall we? Yeah. 우리 사진 스크린샷 찍을까요? 네. time. One, two. 아, 내가 꺼야 되는데 이거를 화면을 상관없죠. 거기서 찍을 거니까. 오케이. 스크린샷을 찍는데 페이지가 두 개 해야 되는 거지, 그지? 일단 찍을 거예요. 예. Okay, so one more time. Okay, so shall we? One, two, three. 오케이, 다 됐어요? 그다음 페이지 있지 않나요? 다 나왔어요. Okay, so yeah, that's great. And then so why don't we taking a group photo, including everyone here in the room, as well as those joining us on Zoom. 저희 사진 한 장 찍을까요? 혹시 어떻게 찍는 게 좋을까요? 일단 이 앉은 채로 한 장 찍고 앞에 나와서 네네 그쵸 예 네네네. Okay, one second, please. Yeah, perfect. So, yeah, 1 second, please.
I don't know what exactly is going on, but we're still, in photo taking mode. So, those on the Zoom, if you can turn on your, cameras, that'll be helpful, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, 1, 2. Oh, wait a second. Yeah, 1, 2. Oh yeah, so perfect. We are done. So we made it. Thank you so much. 바로 들어가야 되네요. 그러니까. Yeah, 5분이라도. Okay, shall we take a 5-minute break and then yeah, let's start session 2. Thank you. And evening, everyone. So my name is Hyun and I will be chairing session 2. It's a pleasure to meet you all here. Yeah. So first of all, as chair of the IASPM Korea branch, I'm very pleased to co-organize with this event with Professor Ildong 조일동 선생님 of the Academy of Korean Studies and our Professor Lee Ki-young of the Korean Association for the Study of Popular Music. So session 2 examines several important genres in modern and contemporary Korean history, ranging from trot to Korean people's songs. Through those genres, this session explores how Korean popular music culture has developed and operated within Korean society and beyond. So this session consists of 3 papers, and we'll hear all 3 presentations consecutively and then have a quick Q&A session. So each presentation will be about 15 minutes long. And this session will be conducted in both English and Korean. The first 2 presentations will be in English, and the third will be in Korean. And the Q&A will be conducted mainly in Korean, but speakers are welcome to respond in English as translated captions will be available. So if you have any questions during the presentations, please leave them in the chat. Okay, shall we begin? Our first speaker is Dr. Ethan Waddell. Dr. Waddell is an assistant professor of Korean at the University of Colorado Boulder. He received his MA in English at Yonsei University and obtained his PhD at the University of Chicago in 2024. His dissertation entitled Listening to South Korean Fiction Through Popular Songs on 1950s to 1970s examines popular music embedded in and constitutive of a selection of Korean prose fictions composed amidst the 3-decade-long turbulence of militarization, Cold War realignment and rapid development in South Korea. His article, Psychedelic Codes and Close Listening to South Korean Fictions, 1971 to 1989, was published in Asia Critic, and he's currently preparing a book, a manuscript based on his dissertation, as well as a co-translation of Jeong-hwan's monograph on censorship and Korean literature entitled Colonial Spheres of Writing. So he will present a paper, The Dialectic of Control and Memory, on writing the musical past and post-liberation Korea. Please give him a round of applause.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kwon, for the introduction. Can everyone hear me? Okay, can you see my
Yeah.
can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. So as Professor Kwon was saying, my research focuses on understanding popular music history through the lens of literary fiction. My presentation today is the latest research that I've been doing to extend the dissertation into a full book project. And so the questions around which the presentation focuses today are: how did writers of literary fiction and music criticism address the musical past during the liberation era from 1945 to 1950? And how might these writings help to inform understandings of Korea's popular song history more broadly? And so it's just to outline briefly what I'll do today. I begin with analysis of the connection between music and memory in a short story by Kim Dong-mi entitled Imatsa, or Brow. And then I move on to early writings on popular song history by the music critic, composer, and musical producer Park Yong-gu, which were written during this era of liberation. And I think I'm going to exclude the final section for the sake of time. But together, I hope that this analysis will help to strengthen my main argument, which is that during the liberation era, a dialectic emerged around the musical past, with some writers emphasizing the powerful connection of popular songs and personal memory, and other writers expressing desires to control the legacy of the musical past through selective acts of erasure and superimposition. More broadly speaking, this dialectic, I argue, can be traced across the creative, historical, autobiographical, and regulatory ways in which popular songs were treated from liberation until the present. Okay, and so I will begin now with Imatsa from 1947. So this story by Kim Dong-mi is one of his lesser read works. The context is, it's written around the food shortages, which were the result of the US military government in Korea having taken control of the requisition and distribution of rice during the early liberation period. And so there were food shortages that spread and mass protests that broke out throughout the southern provinces. However, in Kim Dong-mi's short story, in Imatsa, the author does not directly address the root causes of these shortages, nor does he stage a collective response, as writers on the left did, like Imwa, in writing 인민행진가, or 인민항쟁가. So Kim Dong-mi takes a much more apolitical approach. For him, the rice shortages inspire temporary transgression of the Cold War present by way of a musical memory from the previous decade of colonial rule. The passage from present to past occurs when the protagonist, who's now a middle-aged husband and father, goes to retrieve his family's public allotment of rice, only to receive flour instead. The sensory experience of smelling the flour provokes a Proustian digression from the narrative present back decades to an episode from the narrator's youth, which he spent wandering the peninsula in search of beautiful women. So the narrator recalls stopping one night at a traveler's inn and hearing the beautiful voice of a girl singing as he's trying to fall asleep. And this voice for him sparks thoughts of hometown, which is a reoccurring theme in writings about the musical past. And the narrator thinks that if he can't find this girl, if he can't put a face to the voice, then his entire life would have no meaning. He's very dramatic. And the next day, the narrator wakes up and the girl brings him a bowl of kalguksu. And so at this point in the narrative, we circle back. Okay, yeah, here we go. We circle back to the narrative present with the smell of the noodles from the colonial past, connecting back to the smell of flour, which is distributed in place of rice in the Cold War present. Okay, here we go. So this structure of present, past, present is a trademark of Kim Dong-lee's fiction. In Imatsal, it is used to put into practice a main principle of pure literature, or Sunsu Munha, which Kim Dong-lee was the leading proponent of. And so this principle is known as 구경적 생애 형식, or I translate this as a form of fate exploratory life. And so in this theory, Kim posits that if humanity shares a collective fate, the collective fate of passing their entire lives within the same world, then it also means that each and every human being possesses within themselves the limitless spirit of that world. And so as a literary formed practice, fate exploratory life is supposed to enable the writer to discover the organic bonds of this collective fate, and in doing so to develop the beauty, values, and truth of the transcendent spirit of the world that is inherent within every human being. In Imatsal, if the limitations of humanity's collective fate are manifested through portrayal of the widespread hunger marking the early years of liberation, then it is the powerful connection between music and memory that ultimately enables the narrative self to transcend that collective fate. Thus, the organic connection to which Brough testifies most powerfully is precisely this ineffable bond between musical sound and personal memory, and its ability to provoke moments that transcend the political and societal woes of present reality. Okay, yeah. And so at the time of writing, Kim Dong-lee was among the cultural elite, artists, critics, painters, who frequented the cafes and tea rooms of the newly liberated neighborhood of Myeongdong. And so in personal chronicles of the Myeongdong neighborhood during the liberation period, written by Lee Bong-gu, the novelist, Kim Dong-lee appears alongside other writers, painters, lyricists, and music critics, among whom is the second figure who I will discuss today, and that is the music critic and composer Park Yong-gu. Okay, so in my findings, Park Yong-gu's early writings from the liberation era are the very first attempt to try to historicize Korean popular songs following liberation. Much like Kim, Park also expresses fascination with the irrepressible nostalgia and memories of hometown provoked by hearing fragments of the musical past. However, unlike Kim Dong-lee, Park also addresses the continued influence of undesirable remnants of Japanese colonial rule upon the popular musical sensibilities of the younger generation. And so in the first essay that Park published in November of 1945, he defines yuhenga pejoratively as the wailing of morbid, mournful tones and unproductive emotions of Japanese capitalism in which feudal remnants still waver. Yet he also identifies changa as a prehistory of yuhenga, making positive associations between songs like 애국가 and 소년 남자가 and the longings, the patriotic longings of the Korean youth. In contrast to commercial yuhenga, changa possessed the organic, fairy tale-like qualities of having been transmitted orally from person to person until bursting forth in the collective passions of the March 1st movement of 1919. This duality is precisely what makes popular song history so fascinating to Park Yong-gu, that it is simultaneously a partial history of the development of Japanese capitalism and also a 20-year history of the spirit of the Korean people. And so 2 years later, In 1947, we find another essay called 유행가 이야기, in which Pak develops a metaphorical mode of historical narrativization, which brings to the fore the essential quality of 유행가 as an evocateur of reveries of hometown longing and reflections of youthful memory. Here, nostalgia for the colonial musical past is allegorized as the idyllic dreams of childhood spent playing in one's hometown. The songs that the Japanese record industry peddled in its colonial territory are then equated to the spiderwebs that a child might get caught in while playing hide and seek. Commercial yuhenga obscured the patriotic sentiments of the Korean youth, much like entanglements and spiderwebs transformed childhood reveries into nightmares. Pak then narrates the superimposition of popular song history in layers, taking special care to highlight the events that corresponded with changing trends. So he begins in the 30s with the myopic minor key melancholia of Goga Masao style melodies that gained popularity in parallel to the advances of Japanese capitalism. Then he moves forward to tales of lonely wayfarers or nagane that gained popularity in tandem with the expanding war of aggression in Manchuria and China. And then he moves into the blues style exoticism. Here we go. The blues style exoticism, which rose to prominence concurrent to Japan's southward territorial expansions in the early 1940s, and concludes with the military songs that mark the desperate final years of total mobilization. Pak writes that the combined effect of these poisonous layers was to sublimate the desires and emotions of the youth from a naturally occurring thirst for internationality to a strange lust for foreign invasion. In traversing history from the ephemeral realm of Changa to the advent of commercial recording, up through liberation, Pak adopts an allegorical language that is markedly palimpsestic. By this, I mean that he articulates popular song history as well as popular musical sensibilities through a language of erasure and superimposition. He thus frames the task of post-liberation popular songs as a project of palimpsestic erasure within the broader mission of decolonization. He writes that for the people of our nation to polish the grounds for a new country, over which they can fly joyously like butterflies, we in the music world must invest our efforts most in the task of clearing away the spider webs of popular song history's poisonous layers. Okay, and so now I ask, how might colonial era popular songs have actually been transposed upon the literary soundscapes of liberation? Here I turn back to Lee Bong-gu's semi-autobiographical Chronicles of Liberated Myeongdong. And so despite the change in place name from Meiji-machi to Myeongdong, one finds that the young cultural elite were still singing the same songs as they did prior to liberation, from Japanese standards like Kojo no Tsuki, or Moon Over the Ruined Castle from 1901, to the French version of the Hungarian suicide hymn called Sambre Dimanche, or 어두운 일요일, Gloomy Sunday, to blues-style Korean songs from the late colonial era, like Hwang Shim's 외로운 가로등. So in other words, the spider webs laid by the morbid, mournful tones and unproductive emotions of Japanese capitalism still enshrouded the sensibilities of the liberated younger generation. Indeed, the continued presence of Japanese music, or music perceived to be Japanese, sparked public calls for regulation of the popular soundscape. As early as September 1945, complaints began to pour into the authorities with reports of cafes playing Japanese records, touring troops performing Japanese songs, and publishing companies printing Japanese sheet music being publicized in newspapers. Much of the terminology later mobilized by the regulatory regimes of Park Janghee, terms like 퇴폐, 정화, 저속, and 건전, find precedence in these public disavowals. In fact, there's a line of continuity that extends from the colonial system of popular song censorship through the US military government in Korea laws governing culture and the arts to the 3 decades-long prohibitions on Japanese music, film, and popular serial publications enacted in the wake of mass opposition to the signing of the Korea-Japan Treaty in 1965, all the way to the pre-publication music censorship system of present. At the foundations of popular song regulation across the 20th century is a long-standing, this is in Park Yong-gu's view, is a long-standing contradiction that Park would continue to articulate throughout his life between the traditional Confucian philosophies of music as a fundamental pillar in the ordering of human life and the Joseon Dynasty era disdain for music practitioners, which manifested in their relegation to the bottom of the hereditary class hierarchy. In fact, to Park, the entirety of Korean popular song history could be expressed through the layered accumulation of changes upon the original parchment of this contradiction. And so here, the advent of Changa signals modern Western musical cultures supplanting the contradictions of traditional East Asian musical thought and regulation, and the colonial expansion of the Japanese music industry signals the supplanting of Changa with Japanese styles of Yuhenga. The original association between music and societal order then leaves a ghostly trace on each diachronic layer, as the musical sensibilities of the masses come to be seen as perpetually susceptible to wholesale revision. The logical extension of such revelations is a ready embrace of the kind of top-down movement which defined Cold War popular song regulations from liberation to 1988. By this, I mean the state initiatives aimed at displacing colonial and communist musical affinities with newer, healthier, and more patriotic Gugmin Gayo. Yet rather than any paradigmatic text to be resurrected from beneath the substrates of erasure and superimposition, the palimpsestic historical view ultimately devolves into a quixotic search for the chimera of national or ethno-national origins. For instance, while many Korean critics and scholars identify Enka as the origin of trot, many Japanese scholars identify trot as the origin of Enka. Simultaneously, the traditional disdain for musical practitioners, which marks the original vellum of popular music history with its fundamental contradiction, repeatedly returns to the surface to brand the very act of historicizing popular music as being not only a painful exercise in reawakening the ghosts of the shameful past, but also a frivolous distraction from more serious academic pursuits. Thus, during the Cold War, colonial-era popular song history was transmitted largely by way of subjective personal recollections and a scattering of journalistic writings. And so here I get to the dialectic of control and memory, and so this dialectic emerges between calls to cleanse popular music through acts of erasure of and superimposition upon the musical past, and written acts of memory meant to counter such alterations of it. On the one hand, the canonization and disavowal of popular songs is deeply informed by the selected erasure and concomitant celebration of certain layers of the colonial past. On the other hand, juridical erasures inadvertently catalyze mobilizations of personal memories aimed at preserving or recovering the original human histories associated with the palimpsested songs. In other words, while some excoriate colonial-era songs as empty and imported forms of low entertainment, others hear them as the embodiment of a Korean spirit of resistance and perseverance. Their musical affinities to perpetual home and hometown celebrated in proportion to the histrionics with which their foreignness is condemned. Okay, and so in my broader research project, I look at how this dialectic plays out in writing after the 1965 Korea-Japan Treaty, focusing specifically on how erasures and superimpositions resulting from the controversial revival of colonial-style yuhenga mobilized both literary and historical writings about popular songs. Here I focus specifically on Lee Moon-gu's Kwanchon Tsukil, as well as Park Chan-ho's foundational history Hanguk Gayosa, both of which were inspired by a desire to preserve personal memories of the musical past and to recover parts of popular history that had fallen under threat of regulatory erasure. Okay, so I will end here. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for your excellent presentation. So, yeah, through a wide range of examples, you have shown us how Korean music critics and fiction writers during the liberation period sought to control the remnants of the colonial past, while at the same time remembering their own lives and experiences from that period. And you explained how this dialectic process laid the foundation for the ways in which intellectuals have narrated and transmitted the history of Korean popular music up to now. Okay, so if you have any questions during the presentation, please leave them in the chat. Okay, our second speaker is Dr. Hwang. So Dr. Hwang is an assistant professor in the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultural Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So she specializes in Korean literature and cultural studies, focusing on cultures of protest in modern Korea. And yeah, intellectual history of East Asia, the relationship between aesthetics and politics, theories of rural literature and translation. She is currently working on her book entitled Uncaged Songs, Culture and Politics of Protest Music in South Korea. It's a cultural history of South Korea's song movement that situates the movement within both revolutionary and post-revolutionary moments in the country's path toward democracy on the one hand, and within transnational context of circulation on the other hand. She has published articles, translations, and reviews in the Journal of Korean Studies, Azalea, on Journal of Korean Literature and Culture, and Inter-Asia Cultural Studies. She will present a paper from romance to resistance, Kim Min-gi and the making of student protest culture. So please give a big hand. Dr. Hwang, so we can't hear your voice at the moment. No, we can't hear your voice at the moment. 네, 선생님 소리 한번 내보시겠습니까?
예, 이제
아,
들리시나요?
예, 지금 들립니다. 지금 들립니다. 예,
네, 죄송합니다.
네,
예,
아닙니다.
다시 공유를 할게요.
네.
예. 네, 아직 들리시나요?
잘 들립니다.
네, 보이시나요?
네, 잘 보입니다.
네, 네, 감사합니다. 우선 이번 콜로퀴움을 기획하고 준비해 주신 김필호 선생님, 그리고 오늘 이 자리를 이렇게 마련해 주신 조일동 선생님, 이기용 선생님, 그리고 좌장을 맡아 주신 권영서 선생님께도 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 발표는 영어로 하겠습니다. The paper I'm sharing today with you grows out of a question that runs through my current book project. How does a song become politically consequential? And how does the act of singing reshape the people who take it up? I pursue the question today through Kim Min-gi's music and its rediscovery by university students during the final years of the Shin regime, beginning with an episode from 1979 that bring both parts of the question into especially sharp relief. My point of entry is 1979, when the limits of state-sanctioned student culture became especially visible. That year, an MBC producer invited Seoul National University's song collective, or 노래패 메아리, to enter the college song festival. Although Meari was still a young and largely recreational singing club, the festival offered one of the most prominent national stages available to student musicians. Its celebration of youth and their creativity, however, depended on keeping campus music within a carefully managed and depoliticized framework. Meari entered with Kim Min-gi's song 기지촌, or Camptown, and received the highest possible score from all 5 judges in the preliminary round. As the nationally broadcast final approached, however, the producer informed the members that they couldn't perform the song. The surviving account does not record what explanation was given, but the contradiction was clear. NBC had invited the group, and they'd been approved of its performance on musical grounds. Yet the repertoire through which Meari had chosen to represent itself had become unacceptable precisely at the threshold of national broadcast. Rather than substitute with another song, the group withdrew from the festival altogether. While I do not treat this withdrawal as the moment when Meari suddenly became political, it crystallized the problem that the group had already begun to confront. Official institutions could celebrate student creativity only so long as they retained the authority to determine which forms of student expression were permissible. The incident therefore raised a practical as well as political question, namely, how could songs that reflected the students' own sensibility acquire a public life outside the channels that had excluded them? Taking that question as my point of departure, I trace how the students' encounter with Kim Min-gi's prohibited repertoire changed the social life of his music, and in the process, altered their understanding of their own cultural practice. The alternative circuit that emerged in 1979 drew on a musical culture that had been taking shape for more than a decade. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, college-educated urban youth distinguished themselves through 통불생, the world of acoustic guitars, blue jeans, and draft beer. This was not yet a political movement in any formal sense, but an ethos or structure of feeling organized around 낭만. By 낭만, I mean more than romance or nostalgia. In my study, 낭만 points to a desire to escape conservative norms and the regimented discipline of military authoritarianism. To inhabit the position of 청년, or youth, was to assert generational difference through style and sensibility before it meant participation in an organized movement. So long hair, late night listening, and communal singing in cafes became ways of imagining that sort of freedom. The political content of this culture remained rather unstable. American folk songs associated with civil rights or anti-war activism often arrived detached from the struggles that had produced them, while the freedom associated with 낭만 rested partly on the relative privilege of university-educated youth. The Park Chung-hee regime did not regard such gestures as harmless. By policing youth style so aggressively, the state turned taste and their comportment into very sites of confrontation. 낭만 thus did not inevitably mature into resistance. Much of it was absorbed into commercial popular music. But repeated encounters with discipline and repression gave that diffused generational rebellious spirit a more pointed form of 반항, or disobedience for some young people. Kim Min-gi's early songs emerged from this unsettled terrain. They didn't offer a political program in sharp manner, but the songs gave lyrical form to the sorrow and the conscience of a generation whose discontent had not yet acquired a language of resistance. Morning Dew, 아침 이슬, reveals with particular clarity that unstable passage from cultural style to political opposition. Before it became one of South Korea's most recognizable songs of resistance, the state welcomed it as a model of 건전가요. The song first appeared on Yang Hyun's debut album in June of 1971, and Kim Min-gi released his own version just 4 months later. Neither album sold well, yet the song received the Beautiful Lyrics Prize from the Seoul municipal government and was played through the state-sponsored Echoes of Songs campaign. The imagery of dawn after darkness and the endurance following hardship could be heard as compatible with the regime's language of discipline, while Kim Min-gi's Korean diction offered a wholesome, 건전한 alternative to westernized acoustic guitar culture. Nothing in the song's lyrics or form openly invites cause for concern. Its speaker moves through a sleepless night, anticipating the trial of midday before setting out for the distant plains. The voice remains that of an introspective I rather than a collective we, while the steady rhythm and hymn-like cadence gives the song a very measured, almost liturgical quality. Likewise, the song's turbulent life began not at the moment of its composition, but in performance. In the spring of 1972, Kim Min-gi taught his song Morning Dew to incoming students at Seoul National University alongside numbers like We Shall Overcome, the famous African-American anthem or freedom song. When a demonstration broke out within days, the students sang Morning Dew. Plainclothes detectives then reported the song. The remaining copies of Kim Min-gi's albums were removed from sale, and Kim Min-gi was subsequently detained. His response was quite telling. I'm just a songwriter. All I did was teach them a song. By placing an introspective song within a collective situation, the students alter the conditions of listening so that its movement from sorrow toward resolve acquired a different force at a moment of confrontation. The 1975 ban of the song intensified this process. Under Emergency Decree Number 9, Morning Dew was designated as an impure song or 불온가요, and censors even interpreted the crimson sun above the graveyard as an encoded reference to Kim Il-sung, as is famously recorded. What this revealed is that the composition had not changed. What had changed was the state's assessment of the meanings that may emerge as the song circulated among the students. In the interest of time, I'm going to leave it to you to listen to 아침 이슬 on your own if you haven't already. Okay. The post-1975 history of Morning Dew therefore turns on what students did with Kim Min-gi's work after it had been removed from open circulation. In April 1979, Meari issued another of their songbooks. Because this was already the fourth volume, its publication reveals a continuing practice through which students preserved music and organized it into a repertoire. The preface observes that, quote, amidst the many conflicts through which we must carry on our lives, art can be a form of salvation, end quote. It then laments that, quote, only commercialized popular songs prevail, end quote, on campus, while no songs, end quote, transparently reflect the emotions and consciousness of university students. The editors hoped that the collection would lay the foundations for songs of university students, even intellectual songs, as they call them, that might, quote, resound across campuses, end quote, like Meari. This was not yet the fully developed language of the 1980s song movement to come. The project began from a sense of absence. Commercial music did not speak adequately to their experience, and so the students needed a repertoire of their own. Even so, compiling and editing a volume of songs into a bound book constituted a sustained claim to a sense of cultural autonomy. Roughly 1/3 of the songs were by Kim Min-gi, whose work appeared alongside numbers such as Down by the Riverside, Blowing in the Wind, and We Shall Overcome. In contrast to the early culture of 통불생, which had often detached the American folk songs from their civil rights or anti-war contexts, Meari recovered them as songs born as sites of dissent and placed Kim's compositions within that genealogy. His work, however, remained more directly anchored in the context of Korean authoritarianism and censorship. The rediscovery of Kim Min-gi's songs in this sense did not necessarily signal the discovery of a fixed political message. Through selection and juxtaposition, students resituated Kim's work within new historical relations, helping to transform his prohibited compositions into a repertoire of resistance. If the songbook stabilized the repertoire on the page, it was the cassette tape that made it mobile by building reproduction into the practice itself. In the summer of 1979, Meary's core members decided to record the songs they had been singing. Professor Kim Seongnam, himself an early member of Meary, recalls that the underground circulation of 공장의 불빛, or Lights of a Factory, helped prompt the project because it showed that tape could reach listeners even when official distribution had been blocked. With little money and no regular studio space, the members rented a shabby cafe in Bongcheon-dong on its weekly day off. Using a reel-to-reel recorder, several guitars, and one harmonica, they recorded 16 tracks in a single day, 4 of them songs by Kim Min-gi. The result was technically crude and saturated with echo, but it soon became known as Meary's first album, and within weeks, copied tapes were circulating across campuses. Under a system that sought to control production and distribution, reproducibility gave the cassette its political value. A student could copy the tape again, pass it to another circle, learn the songs from it, or return them to live performance. The break first exposed at the College Song Festival thus acquired a material form here. Meary no longer depended on the official stage to grant its repertoire a public life, since that public could be assembled through hand-to-hand exchange and campus networks. The cassette gave dispersed relationships a shared sound, while every replay opened the possibility of another performance. So far from merely following a set political meaning, it was circulation that helped produce the politics of meaning making. The underground spread of Lights of a Factory provided Meary with a mode of circulation, but the work also directed campus musical practice toward a social world that had remained largely outside Bohemian youth culture. By this point, Kim had largely withdrawn from public performance. He resisted being cast as a spokesman for a political cause, yet his retreat from stage did not amount to a retreat from social engagement. In 1977, Kim Min-gi found work in a warehouse inventory at a garment factory in Bupyeong, where he encountered young women workers central to South Korea's rapid industrialization. Many could not read the English words printed on fabric labels, and because overtime made evening study impossible, Kim Min-gi gathered them at dawn for morning classes. This experience, together with the 1978 Dongil textile incident, became the basis for his 노래굿, Lights of a Factory. The 노래굿, combining song with theatrical and ritual elements of a shamanic ritual 굿, was the form that shaped Lights of a Factory. Folk singer Song Chang-sik lent Kim Min-gi his studio, and the recording was mixed at Ewha Women's University Broadcasting Club. Kim Min-gi produced only 3 master tapes and deliberately obscured their recipients in case of interrogation. At the center of
선생님, 저 2분 남았습니다.
네. 빨리 하겠습니다. At the center were women factory workers confronting exhaustion and displacement. Play the song very quickly. if Morning Dew operated through symbolic openness, allowing students to carry it into myriad different situations, Lights of a Factory embedded social critique within a structured dramatic work and directed attention toward a specific 현장, the factory, the woman who labored there, and the struggle associated with the late labor activist Chun Tae-il. Mary's encounter with the work did not convert a recreational club into labor organization or erase the distance between students and workers, but it made that distance difficult to ignore. By bringing labor struggle into the students' cultural orbit, Lights of a Factory gave conscience to a social referent, the workers. In this sense, the work became an early performative seed of what would later crystallize as 노학연대, and the movement from 반항, or disobedience to authority, toward 저항, sustained resistance, was therefore not simply a shift from ambiguous lyrics to explicit political content. It also involved a reorientation of attention toward whose experience a song might make audible and where students' social responsibility might lie. At this point, I'd like to note that I resist a linear reading of the movement implied by the title of my presentation. I use these terms as conceptual markers for changing forms of opposition and for the responsibilities students came to place upon themselves. Under the late Yushin regime, 저항 described persistence under overwhelming pressure. Its significance lay less in the scale of an action than in the refusal to yield. And Meary's activities in 1979 occupied this very threshold. By selecting songs and sending tapes to campus networks, the members had begun to assume responsibility for the public life of a repertoire. 시간상 여기서 중단을 해야 될 것 같은데. 네.
네. 선생님 뒤에 혹시 많이 남아 있습니까? 어떻습니까?
좀 많이 남았는데요. 우선은
예.
여기서 멈추겠습니다. 네. 네, 감사합니다.
네, 감사합니다. Okay. Thank you so much. For your excellent presentation. So, I think you showed how a culture of student protests emerged through the song movement on university campuses by looking at the case of Mary, and so many songs composed by Kim Min-gi. Thank you so much. And okay, so our final speaker is Janghee, Janghee-son. So Dr. Janghee-son received his PhD in musicology from Osaka University in Japan. So the only university in Japan that has a musicology program within its faculty of literature. So his research focuses on contemporary Japanese history and the history of Korea and Japan relations. Dr. Son is currently a visiting researcher at the Korea Research Center at Remaking University in Japan. So he will present a paper, The Throat Song, The Ferry is Living, and its Japanese adaptation, The Song of the Ferry, and Fractures in Postwar Japanese Memory. So please welcome Dr. Son. I think so Peter. So question for Ethan. In post-liberation North Korea too, the Yuhenga was disavowed as a Japanese remnant by the 1990s. Texts on colonial era music claimed there were two types of Yuhenga: those made and spread with the intention of paralyzing the national independence of the masses, and those that lamented the fate of a ruined country and are therefore more wholesome by comparison. So were there any examples of a similar kind of bifurcation in any of the South Korean texts you looked at? The questions like that. Okay, Ethan?
Peter, to respond to your question, in the essay 유행가 이야기, Park Young-gu also makes a he divides songs which were based on or about like the ruin or laments for the ruined nation. And so here he cites songs like 사의 찬미 and 희망가 and what else? 황성의 적 and 방랑가 by 강석연. He says these are 망국적 영탄을 조장하는 의도의 노래. And then he says that so he gives some minor praise saying that 그나마 소박한 서정이 있었던 것이나 and then 여기에 비해서 중일 전쟁 전후부터의 유행가는 노골적으로 호색 신경을 자극하고 외지 침략을 엽기적으로 선정하여 대중의 어를 뽑아넣기에 악질화되어 갔습니다. So yeah, I think that perception was even being written about as early as 1947. Yeah, so the songs that preceded the conflict between Japan and China in the 30s were viewed as somehow more pure than the songs that were produced during Japan's territorial expansions in the 30s and 40s.
Okay, thank you. Okay, great. And then the second question is from Kim Pil Ho 선생님, so to Sujan. So perhaps 낭만 in the 1970s in South Korea referred to something like bohemianism, which was inimical to the ethos of industrialism in hard work. The Park Chung-hee regime tried to reinforce the question. Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you for the question, Piro. And I think what you brought up is actually quite close to the argument that I was trying to make, in the sense that, 낭만, I mean, it did stand in tension with the regime, and the regime's ethic of discipline and industriousness and all of that. But I also think, and that's where I sense the contradiction within Park Chung-hee's brand of developmentalism and industrialization, is that, modernization via industrialization under Park Chung-hee is also what created and produced that modern youth. And in that way, they must have they should have sensed the freedoms that's going to come with that. That's going to be produced by that kind of modernizing culture. And yet, they become very anxious about the kind of bohemian spirit, right? And then the contradiction then is something that the students then end up resisting. Okay. And then that's where I kind of locate the side of 반항 towards the repression of the 낭만. Okay. And then the part that I didn't get to in the later part of my presentation is that sort of state of 반항 to state authority or 기성세대 would encounter a kind of an ethical moment with Gwangju, with 전태일 through 공장의 불빛. And then it would transform into something a little bit more socially conscious, and then enter into a phase of what I call 저항. So that was what I was trying to get to, but I didn't get there today. But thank you. Thank you for pointing that out.
네, thank you. 감사합니다. Any questions or comments? Yeah. I think it's time to wrap up this session. So yeah, I guess it's lunchtime here in Korea, and perhaps time for late night snack for those of you in the US. So I'd like to sincerely thank you all for joining us for this session. Yeah, thank you so much.
저희 세 번째 세션
네, 세 번째 세션은 네 분의 저를 포함해서 네 분의 발표자가 발표를 준비하고 있고요. 시간적으로 보면 60년대, 70년대, 80년대 제목만 봐도 거쳐서 현재의 한국 대중음악 K-팝에 이르는 굉장히 다양한 장르의 다양한 시기의 다양한 스타일과 다양한 접근들이 오늘 이야기될 것 같습니다. 그러면 바로 첫 번째 발표부터 부탁드리도록 하겠습니다. 첫 번째 발표는 부산대학교의 CedarBough 세이지 선생님께서 New Sounds in an Old Place, Remaking the Meaning of Korean Places Through K-pop 이라는 제목으로 발표해 주시겠습니다. 예, 세이지 선생님 부탁드리겠습니다.
네. 뭐 처음에 초대받아서 너무 고맙습니다. 열심히 일하는 사람들 많아서 오늘 이렇게 발표할 수 있어요. 이거 완성된 프로젝트 아니에요. 그래서 뭐 그 질문 정말 잘 준비해 주세요. 아무튼 이 비디오부터 시작해요.
나만 비비다 행복한 것만 같냐 우는 것보다
미안하지만 저기에 그나요? I'm presenting in English. My notes are all in English. Okay, English. Okay. So, as you can see, here are the members of TXT at Janghee Palace, presenting together with the Seoul City Traditional String Orchestra. And this type of performance in the palace is the sort of thing that I am looking at in this paper. So when we think about the palace, I think that most of us, when we imagine the past soundscape, we are imagining things about officials arguing with the king, and we're imagining something we saw in a drama, like, court ladies preparing food for the people in the palace, and we're thinking about things like that, and we're thinking about the sounds of nature, because the palace was really a place full of birds and crickets and everything else, and then you think about today's soundscape, and you think about how much it's changed, going from an entirely Korean language environment, going through the Japanese colonial era, buildings being torn down, buildings being rebuilt now. And today it's this huge place of tourism. And so it's changed so much. And so this is a chapter where I'm looking at the soundscape of the palaces today, and particularly how, as in the vignette of TXT, how government bodies are using the palaces in coordination with internationally popular music stars in campaigns that ultimately increase tourism. Just a second. So I'm particularly looking at these four different performances in the palace, most of which were done entirely for online, and one of which also had a live audience. And to do this research, I looked at these performances, and I interviewed the government employees in charge of providing permissions for such use of the palace, consulted the regulations on statistics on palace visitors, and then looked at things like YouTube comments, reactions on blogs, TikToks, other social media. So this is part of a larger project, and I think that some of you guys here sorry, I'm trying to get the correct screen to work. Some of you guys here are aware that I recently published an article in Daejung Umak, and that is like half of what I'm presenting today. The article in Daejung Umak and today's article originally were one piece, and it just grew too big. And so in this paper specifically, I'm examining how these four cases construct a relationship between K-pop and Korean royal heritage that brings new sounds to the palace and new visitors to heritage places And specifically, I'm illustrating what I argue is a reshaping of cultural space in contemporary Korea. In the absence of what could be considered a national music genre, due to its international audibility, Korea is being sonically branded through the sounds of K-pop. And these palace performances demonstrate this idea of sound as brand. In addition, branding through high-profile online circulated performances like these presents the palace as visitable to a potential tourist, and it also offers a tantalizing possibility of asynchronous co-presence with beloved stars. As you can see from the statistics, Korean palaces are getting a ton of visitors. There's actually like a very long, very fun history of the different ways that the Korean government has tried to increase palace tourism. A few highlights that are fun is the changing of the guard ceremony that came in 1996. And then in 2004, there was a huge increase in palace visitors because Changdeokgung's secret palace, secret garden, was open to visitors. And then, of course, we also, after the 2009 UNESCO listing of the royal tombs, we've seen an increase also with the royal tombs. And then free admission has continued to be expanded. So it was expanded up to age 24 in 2013. And so these are like some of the different things that the government has done to try to increase tourism. Another thing, of course, is things like if you wear hanbok, you can go to the palace for free, which I have a whole article on if you want to read about people visiting the palace in hanbok. So now we had a huge decrease in visitors to Korea because of the pandemic, but now everything has rebounded, and we can see that we're having millions and millions of visitors coming to these palaces every year. That in 2025 we had getting close to 7 million visitors in Gyeongbokgung. It's just sort of amazing to think about it compared to the past, you know. So moving on. So the government's clearly working to increase this palace visitorship, but how did K-pop performance become part of that agenda? So as you all know, in recent years, we've seen K-pop artists incorporate more traditional iconography and traditional backdrops, and even using some traditional sounds in their work. But when they use something like a palace, it's traditionally been a filming site, something that's also used for dramas and movies. And so this filming inside of a palace has been mostly reserved for traditional music performances and sometimes for like a classical music series or something like that. But it hasn't traditionally been a place where K-pop is performed, with the exception of a couple of like KBS presentations that they've done in the past. But those are quite a long time in the past. So these performance videos that I'm highlighting here, these are something new. And it's basically come up because of the pandemic, because during the pandemic, you know, we had so many artists that faced travel restrictions and concert cancellations. And one of the ways that they could keep audiences involved was to have these special broadcasts. And so something like performing in a palace where you'd never seen them before became the type of way to retain the audience. So now BTS and TXT, those are both, it happened very much in 2020, like in the thick of the pandemic. And even when I talked to the people working at the Seoul Museum of History who are in charge of managing Gyeonghee, then they said, oh yeah, this is very much for 위로 of the people during the pandemic, and it is also for 유도, to entice foreign viewers to visit Seoul. And so we can see that these performances were created with this idea that they're going to bring more people to Korea. Right from the very start, even though they were happening in the midst of the pandemic, they were looking ahead to the end of the pandemic even then. So filming or performing live at a palace, it's not easy. It's not something like renting a set. It's not something like actually constructing a filming set. And the Korean government takes their responsibility to protect the palaces very seriously. There's a whole set of regulations, which I've briefly outlined on the screen, that control how things are happening in the palace. And so in emails with staff members of the Korea Heritage Service, I was told that each request is assessed individually, that there's no standard for, like how popular is the group, and that not all requests are approved. The regulations specify the fees for commercial filming have to be submitted in advance. There has to be a full plan for how to not risk any damage to the location, how to not bother the use of any other Korean people who get to use the palaces as well. Staff members have to be present during the entire filming. And there's a whole bunch of elaborated rules and documentation. And so they wouldn't tell me exact fees, but more recently in 2026, BTS filmed a very few brief scenes from their documentary, BTS The Return, at Gyeongbo Palace and in front of Seongnam, and which is a different fee than the fee that was charged for the performance set in Gwanghwamun. So these are like two different fees. And in the newspapers, they reported that they were charged 61.2 million Korean won for this very brief filming inside of the palace and in front of Seongnam. And that didn't require any sets or any stages or anything like that, which some of these other performances did. And so these other performances theoretically would have cost more than 61.2 million. So part of what I'm looking at here is this idea of Places brand, which Kim Hee-sun has written about. And so when Kim Hee-sun was writing about Places brand, and she's talking about, as we all know, things like Cheonggyeong-dae being associated with Cheonggyeong, or Namdo Minyo being associated with the Namdo region, right? So we have that kind of idea with the ways that performance has been in Korea. And so what I'm doing is I'm expanding on that and expanding on this K branding that we have in Korea and saying that what the government is doing here is that they're associating place as a whole, as an entire country, with K-pop, not with any Korean music, but specifically with idol pop of these largest groups that we see on these international stages. So there have been all these movements for rural revitalization and equitable distribution of tourism, and they've led to creating festivals and tourist attractions all around Korea, and they've used all of these local heritage items. But what we're seeing now is that we're seeing that the place of Korea as a brand is being represented sonically by idol pop, because that's what's most listened to on the international stage, right? And the Korean government, in permitting filming and performance at managed heritage locations, has clearly seen the benefit in the creating a juxtaposition between K-pop and historic sites like palaces. So they're effectively layering new meaning onto heritage places. So Leiper, a tourism scholar, theorized that there are generating markers. There are these information sources about a destination that you consume at home before your trip begins. And they have a strong impact on where a traveler visits and what they do when they go there. And the generating markers for a previous generation might have been travel guides, but for a K-pop fan, and that is so many of the people coming to Korea for tourism these days, for a K-pop fan, it's media associated with the idol that forms the generating marker, and therefore the palace logically gets added to this list of locations to visit in Korea.
Hey YouTube, we're so excited about this. They are one of the most popular
Can't call me artist, can't call me idol. 아니었던 다른 뭐라 해도 idol. Yeah, I'm proud of it.
I'm sorry, I can't play much. So geographer Oh Yoo-jung argues that K-pop idols are a meta commodity to sell secondary products, including celebrity merchandise and K-pop places. And she lays this out in her 2018 book, and she also talks about it more specifically in her article on K-pop fan tourism. And if you look at what she's talking about there, that most of the locations that K-pop fans are visiting on these pilgrimages tend to be locations that are associated either with the corporation and the history of the group, like a restaurant that they went to a lot, or they're associated with the hometown and the family of the idols. But we don't see many sites that people can visit associated with the performance of music, because historically so much was shot on indoor sets. And that's why this sort of like shooting in the palace becomes really important as a driver of tourism, not just to the palace, but then how they consume the palace when they're there, because they're actually comparing an image that they might have on their phone to where they're standing and trying to reproduce the angle and everything else in order to take the perfect photo. So, and I'm already 16 minutes in. Okay. Secondly, having these kinds of performances in the palace, they really remind the viewer of the palace's visibility. Of course, these were recorded when the palace was closed, which might be a Monday or a Tuesday or during the middle of the pandemic, any day. But the video is a long form advertisement for the location. And so many fan tourists, this becomes an essential place, a symbolic place where traces of the idol linger, where they can achieve asynchronous co-presence, which I talk about more in that other article. Sorry, I don't know why it stopped.
Question marks in everywhere. I don't answer. 와서 직접 보게 해. 어떻게 봐도 늘 빛나는 제 깎아내려봐. 더 정교해질 뿐이야. Check the facts, go check that. Check the facts, go check that. Check the stats, go check that. Check that, check that. Check the facts, go check that. Check the facts, go.
So I don't know how many of you guys have seen this, but John Lee's really like famously said that K-pop has like absolutely no connection to traditional Korea, and that K-pop is globally competitive because it's not encumbered, that's the word he uses, by traditional Korea. But now maybe his position has changed, but what I see is that Korean artists do not see embracing Korea or Korean places or Korean things as being an encumbrance anymore. And so it's really interesting that this type of music, that this K in K-pop may at one time have been so disconnected from traditional Korea, but that now, particularly as we have more content coming out in English, we see the artists reconnecting to Korea in other ways. That really is playing, I hope. I know.
You know me like no other.
So since I basically have no time left, super quickly going through the main points from my remaining slides. Fans make a big deal out of this because it is still so unusual for artists to get to perform someplace like the Palace that, when BTS performed, then all of ARMY was like, oh, they're the first ones to perform in front of the throne hall. And then, of course, when New Jeans performed, New Jeans was performing as part of a whole evening of music, and they're the highlight. So of course they're going to go last. But because the Korea Heritage Service knows that the New Jeans fans want to brag about their artists as being the first girls to perform in front of the palace, they pre-recorded this one track that I just showed you a little bit of, so that you could actually say like, oh, they were the first, because the pre-recorded track was in that location. And very, very beautiful stage it was. So through these kind of events, another thing that's going on is that the palace is being shown as a space of leisure. It's not something of the old, of history. Instead, as Jeong-hwan talks about in her article in Korea Journal, it's these nighttime events and things like that. A concert like this New Jeans concert, fashion shows, tea ceremony, demonstration, games, hanbok rental, all of these different things are remaking the palace as a place for leisure, which in a mega city like Seoul is really important, to have this green space that you can go to for healing. And another point that I really want to make is that if you want to visit me, you're going to come to my house, right? Like you can come down to Busan. I would be happy if you guys did. You could talk to my students too. But if you want to visit BTS or NCT 127 or New Jeans or whatever, they become who you can visit when you go to the palace. And of course, fans make a big deal out of this, and we see a lot of fan discourse where they're talking like they're kings, like they're legends. But the idols themselves are not actually claiming to be the kings in these music video performances at the palace. But in other music videos, they do sort of implicitly say that they are the kings by doing things like performing in front of the Ilwol Obongdo, which it becomes a very common traditional motif in music videos these days. So one of the people may be tongue-in-cheek when they're talking about BTS as being kings, but in a way, we could say that idols are now being understood as Korea's new royalty. They are filling empty palace. They're occupying a vacant throne. The Korean government is actively cooperating and facilitating this convergence of K-pop and palace spaces. And it suggests that these stars are not simply claiming power. They're being invited to assume this role. Okay, and my conclusion. Before the pandemic, idol groups did not rent heritage palaces to perform their music. But, you know, now we have a new era, and we have K-pop groups who are performing on such a financial scale that they can actually afford to rent a venue like this to have their performance. And like, sorry. So in this chapter, I'm exploring both how recent performances by K-pop idols at Korean palaces refame the stars, and also the spaces in which they perform. These moments of mediatized performance are not just evidence of idols borrowing cultural capital from the palaces. They also show how the palaces are being infused with new meaning through their association with stars. Performances within these heritage sites speak simultaneously to the continued use of both cultural heritage and pop culture for nation branding, and to the layered experiences of fans, many of whom may be dreaming of travel to Korea and encountering Korean traditional architecture for the first time through idol-led performances. This fusion of youth culture and heritage repositions the palace not only as a touristic site or remnant of the past, but as an emotionally resonant space animated by the movements, voices, and mediated charisma of contemporary idols. As such, the palace becomes both a stage and a shrine, a site where the past lends authority to the present and where the contemporary animates the historical. And perhaps as the lead comment on YouTube says best about the New Jeans performance, 국가유산 보러 왔습니다.
감사합니다. 그래도 저희가 점심을 먹었기 때문에 약간 이제 그 앞에 세션처럼 급하게 막 이렇게 안 해도 될 것 같아서 조금 시간이 오고 했지만 그래도 신정환 선생님께서는 시간을 잘 20분 지켜주시라 믿으면서 예 다시 이야기가 한 60년대면 60년 전인가요? 60년 전으로 거슬러 올라가서 성균관대학교의 신정환 선생님께서 1960년대 이후 한국 대중음악 잡지와 대중음악론의 향방, 담론적 재구성과 이론의 갱신을 위하여 어렵네요. 라는 제목의 발표를 해주시겠습니다. 예, 선생님 20분 발표 부탁드리겠습니다.
네, 잠시 공유를 하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 안녕하십니까. 오늘 이 대중음악 잡지를 중심으로 해서 몇몇 이야기를 준비해 보았습니다. 발표를 맡은 신정환이고요. 먼저 그 발표 기회를 주신 조일동 선생님과 또 학회 또 여러 참석해 주신 선생님들께 감사하다는 말씀 먼저 드리면서 시작을 하도록 하겠습니다. 기본적으로는 60년대 이후에 대해서 한번 그 궤적을 좀 풀는 식으로 여러 이야기를 이제 좀 준비를 해보았고요. 현재 이제 제가 조금 연구적으로나 좀 여기 그 어떤 주제적으로나 지금 고민하고 있는 지점들을 오늘은 좀 나누고 싶었습니다. 그래서 박사 논문을 기본적으로 나중에 이제 좀 단행본으로 확장을 하고자 하는 그런 고민이 있고, 그리고 박사 논문에서 좀 해결되지 않았던 여러 뭐 사안들이랄까요? 그런 것들에 대해서 오늘 좀 종합적으로 말씀을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 제목을 좀 거창하게 했지만 이제 이렇게 막 저기 아니고 이건 이제 전부 그 요지문의 앱스트랙에 다 이제 담겨 있는 내용이고요. 자, 먼저 간단하게 목차 말씀드리면 80년대, 90년대를 조금 중심적으로 놓긴 하는데요. 거기에서 80년대 이전과 그리고 또 90년대 이후를 좀 접속을 어떻게 할 것인가 이런 것들을 좀 말씀을 드리려고 합니다. 이렇게 요 정도 순서로 말을 하고 이제 기본적으로 제가 자료들을 조금 중심으로 이야기를 하면서 저는 시간을 절대 안 넘기기 때문에 걱정 안 하셔도 되고요. 자, 먼저 기본적인 사항이랑 그다음에 60년대 이후에 좀 잡지와 그리고 담론의 문제에 대해서 이야기를 할 겁니다. 일단은 제가 좀 가지고 있는 그 개인적인 자료들을 먼저 이렇게 사진들을 몇 개를 나열을 하면서 말씀을 이렇게 드리도록 하겠습니다. 이제 뭐 집에 있는 그런 뭐 월간 팝송 이제 1970년대에 나왔던 그 자료들입니다. 이때의 음악 잡지는 70년대 경우에는 71년에 창간한 월간 팝송이 아무래도 그 기간적으로도 그렇고 뭐 독자층으로도 그렇고 규모로도 그렇고 여러 가지로 사실 가장 그 주된 잡지라고 할 수 있고 그 이외에 사실 이 정도의 잡지는 거의 없었다고 볼 수 있을 것입니다. 좀 이따가 이제 나중에 또 이야기를 하겠지만 70년대에도 짧은 기간 존재했던 대중음악 전문 잡지는 있었습니다. 월간 팝송 말고도. 그리고 60년대에도 팝스코리아나나 그리고 또 이제 가요생활이라는 잡지가 또 있었고요. 역시나 50년대까지 그리고 또 60년대 중반 이전까지는 역시 신문 비평이 훨씬 중요했고 그 이외에 각종 이제 어떤 종합지라든지 다른 주제의 잡지들에서 대중음악에 관한 또 클래식 잡지 같은 음악 잡지들에서 팝스란이 조그맣게 이제 있는 그런 방식으로 이제 존재를 했었죠. 이게 79년 뭐 8월로 이런 자료였던 것으로 제가 기억을 합니다. 그래서 이런 목차를 보면은 다양한 이제 잡지가 언론의 기능을 하고 정보의 기능을 하고 그리고 또 나중에 이제 제가 또 제시한 사진에서 나오겠지만 또 이제 그게 중요하죠. 악보와 그리고 또 가사집 이런 기능을 함께 했던 것이 이제 당시의 음악 잡지였습니다. 이 기조는 뭐 2000년대 초반 이 활자인쇄 잡지의 전성기 이제 그 어떤 그 존속이 끝나는 때까지도 유지가 되죠. 그래서 이건 무단 전제였습니다. 이 당시 때 70년대 때 이제 그 빌보드 차트를 무단으로 이렇게 가져와서 게재를 했고요. 따로 이렇게 단행본을 이렇게 내기도 했다고 아래 이제 광고 나와 있죠. 이제 당시 이제 그 편집장이었던 이제 그 이문세 씨의 글도 이렇게 있고 이런 식으로 본격적인 이론적 작업이라기보다는 이제 단순한 인상 비평을 넘어서는 이런 어떤 평론 시평의 글들이 이제 많이 존재를 했었죠. 그리고 역시나 이제 애독자 페이지 이제 독자 참여란인데 여기 보면은 뭐 어떤 음반에 대한 작가 비평, 작품 비평, 그다음에 이제 문학 그리고 또 여기는 나오지 않았지만 여러 이제 그림들을 보낸다든지 종합적인 어떤 문예지의 성격을 이 독자 참여란을 통해서 음악 잡지가 기능을 했다고 볼 수 있습니다. 아까 말씀드렸듯이 이렇게 악보집 등등등 또 이제 자료들이 있고요. 요거는 76년 몇 호로인지는 제가 지금 정확히 기억이 안 나는데 여기 보면은 76년 11호로 부록이었던 것 같아요. 11호로 부록으로 나왔던 이제 뭐 자료고 이런 식으로 막 책이 이렇게 부록으로 악보집을 주고 그랬던 것이 있고 이거는 그냥 이제 당시 나왔던 여러 자료들 제가 갖고 있는 거를 이렇게 좀 게재를 해봤고요. 이제 건전가요 뭐 이렇게 이런 거다 보니까 이런 식으로 당시 이제 국가주의적인 어떤 그런 것들이 존재를 하죠. 그리고 또 뭐 가요 반세기라고 해가지고 당시에도 이제 어떤 대중음악과 관련된 음악사를 쓰는 작업들이 아마 뭐 60년대 그런 시기부터 다 존재를 했던 것으로 제가 기억을 합니다. 이건 이제 제가 갖고 있는 소장하고 있는 실물 자료 중심으로 좀 말씀을 드렸고 요런 이 일반적인 음악 잡지들도 굉장히 한국에 많았는데 주로 대중음악 잡지는 그 비중이 굉장히 이제 크지 않았다, 작았다. 요걸 좀 말씀드리고 싶습니다. 그런 식으로. 그래서 제가 기본적으로는 이 어떤 대중문화를 중심으로 하는 문화론이나 매체론 같은 것들을 이제 좀 진행을 하고 이제 싶은 마음이 있는데 여기에 있어서 사실 한국학은 또 중요한 관심사였습니다. 이제 굳이 박사논문 이야기를 하는 이유가 원래는 잡지 연구를 하고 싶었는데 그렇게 가릴 수가 없었던 제 개인적인 경험이 있었습니다. 잡지만 가지고 무엇인가를 하려고 했을 때 난점을 굉장히 많이 만났었습니다. 아무튼 당시 제 심사위원 중 한 분이 이제 조일동 선생님이셨고 이제 잘 이렇게 그 방향성을 이끌어 주셔서 잘 이렇게 했는데 그리고 최근에 이제 이든 워델 선생님하고 같은 호수에 이제 한국의 인하 코스에 논문을 낸 적이 있는데 이때도 잡지만을 가지고 이야기를 하고 싶었는데 도저히 그렇게 진행을 할 수가 없었던 기억이 있습니다. 그래서 결국은 예를 들어서 70년대에 공연윤리위원회에서 발간했던 공연윤리 그리고 또 그전에 뭐 예륜에서 발간했던 이제 예술윤리라는 그런 회보 같은 것들도 있는데 그런 자료들이 함께 조금 더 포괄적으로 대중음악 혹은 대중문화 담론으로 이제 담론 자료로 이렇게 포획이 되는 식으로 바라볼 수밖에 없었던 연구를 하자니 좀 그런 방식으로 진행을 하게 되었었던 제가 기억이 있습니다. 근데 중요한 거는 80년대가 제가 아까 가장 중요하다고 말씀을 드렸던 이유는 사실은 80년대 이전의 대중음악에 대한 논의는 그러니까 좀 이론적인 그 성격을 갖는 어떤 그런 측면에서의 학술적인 논의랄까? 그것은 사실은 굉장히 파편적이었습니다. 아까 이제 앞선 발표들에서 나왔던 뭐 예를 들어 해방공간에서의 비평들 60년대의 그런 65년 수교 정상화가 되면서 뭐 주간왕국의 여러 그런 이제 논쟁들도 나오고 뭐 외색이란 무엇인가는 사실은 20세기 한국 거의 100년의 주제였습니다. 지금은 그래도 많이 그것이 없어지긴 했지만 근데 80년대에 들어오면서 어떤 그런 기본적인 민족주의적이고 어떤 이분법적인 시각은 남아 있지만 이론적이고 심층적인 어떤 그 양상들이 증대를 하게 됩니다. 저는 이것을 그 당시 때 이제 잡지 시장과 출판 문화가 확장되는 지면이 확대되고 새로운 논자들이 등장했던 그것을 좀 이제 주요하게 이제 바라보았었습니다. 그러면서 점차 시간이 지나면서 80년, 87년 그리고 또 90년대 이런 식으로 진행이 되면서 뭐 민예총이 등장하면서는 사실은 대중음악은 굉장히 중요한 하나의 그 파이가 되었었고 그리고 90년대 들어오면서는 뭐 이제 좀 이따 이야기를 하겠지만 강원이나 임진모 같은 평론가들, 비평가들이 대중음악과 그리고 또 시대 자체가 뭐 문화부의 등장이나 그리고 또 대중문화 자체를 굉장히 진지한 어떤 논의의 대상으로 바라봤던 그런 맥락이 있었죠. 결국은 중요한 거는 90년대가 지나면서 어떤 그 학술적이고 심층적인 논의가 이제 증가했다. 그래서 80년대, 90년대의 어떤 그 이제 이 시기적으로 굉장히 한국이라는 이 역사적인 배경에서 대중음악론이 굉장히 그 중요한 시기다. 80년대, 90년대가. 그래서 단순하게 인상비평 그리고 또 도덕론으로 끝나는 것이 아니라 예술론이자 윤리론으로서의 하나의 이론적인 그런 얼개가 완성이 되었다. 이제 동시대, 그러니까 저는 그 80년대, 90년대를 축으로 두고 6070과의 연결, 그다음에 역시 이제 인터넷과 한류와 케이팝이 등장하기 시작하는 2000년대, 2010년대, 2020년대와 연결을 이제 어떻게 할 것인가 계속 도모를 하고 있습니다만은, 그렇다면 동시대란 무엇이고 현대 한국이란 무엇인가? 물론 이제 지금 시대에 한국에서의 현대라고 했을 때 여러 의미가 있겠지만 좀 60년대 이후를 주로 이제 바라볼 수 있을 것입니다. 그리고 60년대의 특징은 역시나 주제하다시피 신문뿐 아니라 잡지 문화가 훨씬 발전을 하게 되는 그런 배경을 가지고 있죠. 뭐 판매량이라든지 나왔던 잡지라든지 이런 것들이 완전히 이제 변하게 되어서, 물론 이제 20년대, 30년대의 어떤 그 대중독자 문화라는 것이 분명 이제 가시화가 된 바가 있지만, 그것과는 또 별개로 60년대 이후의 어떤 그 맥락이라는 것에서는 굉장히 큰 그 어떤 분기점이라고 할 수 있겠습니다. 그리고 또 이제 또 어려운 부분인데, 60년대가 되면서 기존에 사실 오늘 여러 이야기가 나왔던, 예를 들어 박영구 선생도 그렇고, 박영구 선생은 해방공간 이후에 이제 어떤 현대 한국의 초기적인 형태가 구축된 이후에 남한 단독 정부가 이제 구성된 이후에 결국은 일본으로 도망을 갈 수밖에 없게 되죠. 그러고 나서 60년대에 이제 박정희가 정권을 잡게 되면서 사실 돌아가게 되고, 그러면서 이제 박정희, 김종필, 김숙은 세 명이 이제 굉장히 이제 친한 사이다 보니까 어떤 한국의 문화예술장에 굉장히 큰 영향을 끼치는 그런 맥락들이 존재를 하죠. 근데 중요한 건 뭐냐면, 이제 박영구 선생님 이야기 나왔지만 박영구, 김광 같은 좌익 계열의 어떤 논자들과 그 단체의 역사들이 60년대 되면서 예총이라는 단체가 생기면서 이제 완전히 이런 어떤 그 구분이 굉장히 희미해지죠. 80년대를 기점으로 이제 이게 다시 변화를 했던 것이고, 2020년대라는 지금 우리가 지금 2020년대 중반이 넘어서는 시기에 있는데, 역시나 90년대라는 시기가 좀 중요하지 않을까 이 생각을 해봅니다. 그래서 동시대라는 것은 사실 아직 오지 않은 도래할 현재성을 이제 뭐 함께 이야기를 해야 되는 부분이기 때문에, 현대라는 측면에서 이야기를 한다면 역시 60년대에서 90년대가 굉장히 중요하고 그 연구라는 측면에서 도 매력적이지 않나라는 생각을 합니다. 그래서 역시 그리고 그 이후로는 산업화, 민주화, 세계화, 물론 이게 뭐 순차적으로 선형적으로 이루어졌다고 말을 하는 것은 아니지만, 이런 어떤 일련의 변화들이 지금 우리의 그 세계관과 그리고 또 시대상을 만들고 있다, 이 말씀을 좀 드리고 싶습니다. 그래서 80년대 간단히 말씀을 한번 몇 가지를 드려보겠습니다. 그 이전에 사실은 오늘도 이야기가 많이 나왔지만, 사실 물론 이제 유행가라는 표상 자체도 굉장히 그 광의적이고 여러 가지로 좀 이렇게 시기와 맥락에 따라서 맞게 보아야 하겠지만, 유행가, 대중가요 같은 이런 일련의 그 범주 구분들이 저속, 저급, 단순, 뭐 단편적인 어떤 그 음악의 그 틀을 하고 있지만 굉장히 단편적인 순수한 상품이다, 이런 식으로 바라보는 시각이 굉장히 많았죠. 그게 이제 뭐 한 80년대를 기점으로 해서 담론적으로 굉장히 이제 조금 다른 의식이 돌출이 되었다고 저는 이제 생각을 했습니다. 뭐 이런 부분들은 당연히 다 여러 선생님들께서 아마 그 인지를 하고 계시리라 생각을 합니다만은, 기존의 어떤 그 민족주의적인 어떤 역사 의식이라든지, 그리고 또 당대의 뭐 70년대 언더운동부터 시작을 해가지고 80년대에 지식인 중심의, 그리고 또 어떤 하향식이 아니라 새로운 우리 이제 좀 이따 이야기를 하겠지만 그런 무크지 운동 같은 것들이 일어나면서 민중이라는 개념이 다시 한번 중요하게 이제 재개념화되죠. 70년대 민중 개념하고는 또 분명히 다를 겁니다. 뭐 백낙청이나 서남동이나 안병무 이런 여러 분파의 사람들이 이야기했던 민중이 있을 것이고, 80년대 어떤 의미로 이제 좀 웃긴 표현일 수 있겠지만 대중화된 민중 개념은 확실히 이제 80년대부터라고 할 수 있을 것입니다. 중요한 것은 대중음악에서 윤리적 가치를 긍정하는 움직임이 좀 등장하였다, 80년대 이렇게 보고 싶습니다. 그래서 좀 잡지의 맥락을 좀 보면은, 월간 팝송은 71년 창간이 되어서 87년 폐간이 되었고요. 그리고 음악 세계는 원래 이제 존재하던 잡지였지만 이제 중앙일보사가 84년에 인수를 해서 대중음악지로 재창간을 했는데 89년에 폐간이 됩니다. 이제 뮤직 라이프라는 잡지는 원래 이제 김지평 주필에 의해서 월간 건전가요로 81년에 창간이 되고 2003년까지 존속하다가 이제 폐간이 되었습니다. 역시 이제 중요한 건 노래동인의 노래겠죠. 뭐 김창남 선생님, 이형민 선생님을 비롯해서 당대의 민중문화운동, 민중문화예술운동의 한 분파라고 볼 수 있을 것이고요. 관련되어서는 이제 마당이라는 잡지에서 이것과 관련된 또 여러 논의들을 발견할 수 있습니다. 음악동화라는 잡지가 84년에 창간이 또 되었습니다. 84년에 많은 잡지들이 창간이 되었어요. 객석이라든지 예술가 비평, 월간중앙 등등 다양한 이제 시사지, 예술지, 문화지 등등이 이제 창간이 되었던 것이 80년대 초중반 이 시기입니다. 그래서 간행물에서도 여러 이야기들이 나오고 그 뒤로 다양한 단행본들에서도 이런 관련된 내용들이 나옵니다. 노래는 특히 이제 무크지 운동의 일환이었기 때문에 이제 다양한 저자들이 함께 이제 참여를 하는 어떤 부정기 간행물로 발간이 되었었죠. 아까 말씀드렸던 가요생활이라는 잡지인데 1966년에 창간이 돼서 70년까지 존속이 되었습니다. 60년대의 그 맥락을 조금만 이야기를 하면은 60년대 중반 정도가 되면서 아무튼 미군 부대의 그 이제 무대의 그 규모가 줄어들게 되죠. 이제 계속 한국에 주둔하던 미군 그 규모는 줄어들었기 때문에 그러면서 미팔군 무대 뮤지션들이 일반 음악 무대라는 곳으로 이제 나오게 되는 그 맥락과 연결이 좀 됩니다. 그러면서 이제 당시에 급증하던 종로 일대의 음악학원 그리고 또 거기에서 이제 단체화가 되었던 그런 맥락이 함께 작용을 합니다. 음악동화라는 잡지고요. 여기서도 이제 대중음악 관련 이야기가 많이 나왔습니다. 아까 말씀드렸듯이 월간 건전가요로 시작이 되어서 뮤직라이프로 제호를 변경을 해서 이야기가 되었었고 예술가 비평 이제 요거는 이게 조금 그 일반 대중 잡지는 아니고 좀 지식지 그리고 또 비평지의 일환이었는데 여기서도 대중문화 관련된 이야기가 많이 나왔던 그 맥락이 있습니다. 월간 팝송 같은 경우는 예를 들어 뭐 신현주 선생님이나 그리고 또 성현 선생님이나 이런 분들이 이제 잡지를 조금 이제 그 잡지에서는 별로 볼 이야기가 없다 이런 이야기를 많이 하셨었어요. 근데 이제 월간 팝송을 비롯해서 여러 가지 그 잡지들을 통해서 꽤 의미 있는 글들을 많이 발견을 할 수 있었습니다. 근데 월간 팝송은 사실은 그 생각보다 제가 난관에 많이 부딪혔던 잡지입니다. 왜냐면은 1970년대 자료들이 많이 이제 소실이 된 상태입니다. 특히 이제 71년에서 73년 자료는 아마 그 어떤 수집가들도 잘 가지고 있지 않다는 말을 제가 좀 이렇게 들은 것 같고, 그리고 70년대 후반까지도 70년대 후반 자료까지도 이제 잘 이제 아카이빙이 안 되어 있는 상황입니다. 저도 이제 좀 더 자료를 찾아봐야 되는 상황인데 참 힘든 부분이 많습니다. 그래서 70년대의 월간 팝송을 보지 않고서는 여러 이야기를 할 수 없을 것인데 수집할 수 있는 자료가 조금 제한적이다 보니까 어려움을 느끼고 있고요. 나중에 월간 가요로 제호를 바꿉니다. 87년이 되면서. 그러면서 몇 개월을 버티지 못하고 폐간이 됩니다. 음악 세계라는 잡지가 굉장히 재밌고 중요한 측면이 있습니다. 그러니까 월간 팝송의 경우에는 그야말로 뭐 10대 잡지 그리고 또 어떤 정보지 또 뭐 일종의 언론지 성격 뭐 그런 것들이 좀 더 강했다면은 음악 세계는 흥미롭게도 이제 비평지의 성격이 좀 그 더 강했다고 좀 볼 수 있습니다. 84년에 대중음악지로 이제 재창간이 되었던 잡지고 월간 팝송의 독주에 뭐 제동을 걸었고 뭐 이강 체제를 구축했다 이렇게 볼 수 있는데 당시에 어떤 그 대중음악 담론장이 확대가 되었던 한 방증이라고 저는 좀 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다.
선생님 2분
예, 알고 있습니다. 그래서 정식 라이센스를 받았던 잡지고요. 그래서 나중에 이제 이것도 뮤직시티로 이름을 바꾸고 이제 좀 버티지 못하고 끝나게 됩니다. 그래서 사실 이제 그 노래운동이 발행했던 노래라는 이제 무크지가 있죠. 근데 이제 저는 이 당시 때의 여러 논자들이 어떤 대중음악에서 오히려 특정한 윤리적 가능성을 발견했다고 좀 바라봅니다. 요건 이제 넘어가도록 하고요. 말씀을 드리고 싶은 거는 80년대에 이전에는 뭐 나훈영이나 서경술 같은 분들이 좀 흥미로운 이야기를 많이 했었고, 김창돈 선생님 말할 것도 없고요. 황병기 선생님이 굉장히 대중음악에 대한 이야기를 많이 했습니다, 당시에. 그래서 저는 이제 대중음악 담론사 혹은 대중음악사의 한 페이지에 황병기 선생님을 쓸 수 있다. 이렇게 좀 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다. 그리고 역시 이건용, 서우석 선생님 같은 분들이 당시에 이제 또 대중음악과 관련된 여러 이야기를 했고 공통점이 대중음악에서 어떤 특정한 긍정적인 가능성을 발견하는 식의 비평을 했다는 것입니다. 그것이 단순하게 대중음악이 장점이 많고 좋다가 아니라 비판적이고 비평적인 시각을 이제 견지를 하면서 바라보셨다는 겁니다. 이렇게 조영남 선생님하고 대담을 했던 것이 음악동화 1984년에 이제 그 게재가 되어 있습니다. 그래서 여기서도 조금 이제 민중성 이야기를 하십니다. 여기서도 여러 말씀을 하셨고요. 요것도 음악 동화였던 것 같습니다. 네. 그리고 이권영 선생님도 어떤 그 대중음악이 가지고 있는 가치를 다원적이고 그리고 다층적으로 바라보셨고, 그리고 서우석 선생님께서도 이제 여기서 굉장히 이제 독특한 그 여러 논의를 제시를 하시고, 한국 대중음악을 단순하게 이분법으로 바라보기보다는 한국 대중음악 자체를 뭐 가요, 그리고 이제 가곡, 그리고 뭐 대학가요 이런 식으로 좀 구분을 하십니다. 이렇게 프로그레시브 록에 대해서 글을 쓰신 적도 있습니다. 90년대 이야기를 조금 하고 마무리를 하도록 하겠습니다. 80년대가 사실은 더 파이가 커서 제가 좀 그렇게 이야기를 말씀을 드렸고요. 아까 좀 설명드렸던 부분이어가지고 간단하게 말씀을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 민예총 설립이 굉장히 중요한 하나의 이제 뭐 좀 분기점이었고요. 그리고 또 90년대의 흐름이라는 게 당시에 문화 그리고 또 대중문화를 중심으로 하는 여러 가지 그 논의를 제시하는 잡지들이 등장을 합니다. 그래서 뭐 지배대 저항, 뭐 수능대 뭐 이렇게 뭐 이제 저항 이런 식의 이분법보다는 조금 더 다른 주류 대 비주류 안에서 어떤 진정성을 어떻게 가져갈 것인가 이러한 논의들을 이제 이야기를 합니다. 요건 사진을 보면서 간단히 말씀을 드릴게요. 상상이라는 그 개간지가 있었고 리뷰라는 개간지가 있었죠. 강원 임진모 같은 분들이 여기에서 서태지와 이제 서태지에 대한 어떤 비평을 새롭게 해내고, 그리고 이 당시 때 뭐 이영민 선생님이나 그리고 또 정태춘과 서태지를 맞닿게 만들었던, 물론 이제 일련의 90년대 여러 그런 검열 철폐의 그 어떤 그 흐름 같은 것들과 연결이 되었던 것인데, 그래서 굉장히 풍부한 어떤 담론장이 있었다. 그래서 80년대 이후에 뭐 포토뮤직, 한뮤직, GMV 등등의 다양한 잡지 자료들이 존재를 했습니다. 그래서 80년대의 연장선상에 조금 있다고 할 수 있고요. 여기서 이제 규명 지점을 요거 하나만 말씀을 좀 드리고 마무리를 하도록 하겠습니다. 역시 70년대와 연속성, 그리고 또 미시사의 재구성과 여러 근거를 어떻게 가져올 것인가. 이때는 이제 KDI 같은 곳이 등장을 하고 어떤 그 싱크탱크가 이제 거의 최초로 등장을 하게 되죠. 다양한 자료들이 이제 많이 나오게 됩니다. 민관 이제 다양하게. 그래서 어떤 담론사로서, 그리고 또 여기에서 이 담론이 음악사를 또 어떻게 썼는가, 요거를 지금 저는 한번 관심을 가지고 여러 이야기를 하고 싶습니다. 그리고 2000년대와의 연결 지점, 여기까지 말씀을 드릴게요. PC통신이라는 것이 이제 가진 영향력, 그 다음에 이제 웹진 시대로 넘어가면서 정말 난점이 많습니다. 이걸 어떻게 연구를 하고 바라볼 것인가? 그리고 90년대 이후에 글로벌라이제이션을 어떻게 이야기를 할 것인가? 문화냉전을 넘어서는 그 양상을 어떻게 이제 설명해 낼 것인가를 한번 계속 고민을 하고 있는 상황입니다. 여기까지만 말씀을 드리고 마무리를 하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 감사합니다.
예, 감사합니다. 늘 알고 있는 사실이지만 시간을 다 안 쓰신다는 분들은 믿지 않는 것이 감사합니다. 자, 그럼 이어서 국민대학교 겸임교수이신 박종현 선생님께서 소리, 공간, 연행 혹은 사람으로서 7080 장르 기호의 사적 접근이라는 제목의 발표해 주시겠습니다. 예, 선생님께도 20분 부탁드리도록 하겠습니다.
저 보이시나요?
예.
예. 네, 안녕하세요. 박종현이라고 합니다. 오늘 7080이라는 기호에 대해 이야기를 할 건데 70년대와 80년대에 대한 이야기는 아니고요. 2000년대 이후에 이 기호가 등장하고 나서의 이야기라고 할 수 있겠습니다. 이제 제목에서 보실 수 있듯이 7080이라는 개념이 표현이 기표가 때로는 소리, 때로는 장소, 때로는 연행성, 때로는 종족성을 의미하기도 하는데 이것들 중에 어떤 것들이 어떤 시대에 어떤 맥락 속에서 드러나고 지워지고 하는가에 대한 과정적인 관심을 가지고 수행한 연구의 결과물입니다. 그래서 이 작년에 대중음악지에 실렸던 제 첫 번째 이제 실론적인 논문이 있는데요. 그 논문의 내용이 오늘 발표의 전반부가 될 것이고, 그거 이후에 제가 조금 더 인터뷰라든가 이런 걸 통해서 확장을 하고 있는 내용을 조금 더 첨가한 내용이 오늘 이야기가 되겠습니다. 7080이라는 이 기호는 어디에서나 발견됩니다. 한반도를 걸어 다니다 보면 어디에선가 보게 됩니다. 거리의 간판으로 여기 있죠. 도심 속의 휴식처 7080 풀코스가 있고요. 그리고 행사의 이름으로도 있습니다. 그리고 TV나 라디오의 프로그램명, 요즘은 많이 사라졌지만 여전히 존재하고 있어요. 라디오에서는 꼭지명으로도 아직 많이 사용이 되고 있습니다. 그리고 왼쪽에 이거 7080 해바라기 편집 음반이고요. 해바라기 선생님들이 이거를 동의했는지 모르겠지만 어쨌든 그렇습니다. 그리고 가운데는 문화축제, 7080 DJ 문화축제가 있죠. 그리고 음반점에 가면 이렇게 7080이라는 이름의 카테고리가 존재하는 곳들이 여전히 있습니다. 오른쪽에 있는 책인데요. 책에 좀 이따 얘기하겠지만 7080 편의 드럼 악보집이 있고요. 오른쪽에는 노래방에 가시면 현재 가장 퍼센티지가 높은 지배하고 있는 태진 미디어에 가시면 7080이 따로 섹션이 있습니다. 이렇게 여전히 범주로서 자리를 하고 있습니다. 그래서 7080은 이 모든 것입니다. 그런데 이 중에 어떤 것들이 어떤 시대에 더 강조가 되기도 하고 아니기도 하고 이런 일들이 있다는 거죠. 그래서 이 모든 것들은 또 생각해보면 7080은 실제로 70, 80년대에 대한 이야기이기 때문에 시간성으로부터 시작된 용어이지만 우리가 7080을 이야기할 때는 음악이라는 소리에 대한 무엇인가를 생각하게 됩니다. 그렇죠? 그것은 이것의 탄생에서부터 그랬기 때문이기도 한데, 그러니까 쉽게 말하면 7080이라는 세대가 먼저 존재하고 그 다음에 그들이 향유하는 게 음악이 된 게 아니라 7080은 음악으로서 등장했고 그 다음에 음악적인 소리, 음악적인 공간, 음악적인 사람에 대한 것들을 확장이 되었다라고도 생각해 볼 수 있겠습니다. 지금까지 7080에 대한 연구는 놀라울 정도로 없어요. 7080이라는 말을 전면에 내세운 것들은 음악학 안에서는, 방해 음악학 안에서 없다고 볼 수 있고 7080 세대의 노스텔지어에 대한 이야기라든가 7080 축제에 대한 어떤 비음악학이라고 표현을 해야 할까요? 비음악적인 주제에 대한 논문들이 한두 개 있을 뿐입니다. 음악적으로 규정하는 혹은 음악학적인 관심을 두고 있는 논문들은 대체로 음악 내적인 방식으로 이렇게 규정을 하고 있어 왔습니다. 그러니까 7080은 포크송 계열의 한국 대중음악이다 라는 분도 있고요. 그다음에 7080을 캠퍼스 밴드라는 이름의, 그러니까 특정한 연령대와 특정한 상황에 있었던 사람들이 밴드라는 앙상블의 형태를 가지고 무언가를 했던 그러니까 록이라는 이야기랑 장르랑 연결이 되죠. 이런 경우도 있고요. 그리고 이제 저항이라든가 시대적인 어떤 청년 문화, 완곡하고 우회적인 시대의 저항을 담은 소수의 대중음악, 이런 방식으로 음악 내적인 어떤 레퍼토리라든가 장르적인 속성과 연결을 지어서 정의를 해왔습니다. 근데 만약에 이렇다면 실제로 7080이 본질적으로 이 학술 연구자들이 이야기했던 것처럼 음악 내적인 얘기를 가지고 있다면 현재 2020년대 7080과 관련된 어떤 것들을 보아도 맞지 않는 일들이 대부분입니다. 왼쪽은 무엇이냐 하면 작년인가 재작년인가까지 마지막으로 지상파에서 방송했던 콘서트 7080 플러스라는 프로그램인데 그 마지막 회입니다. 뭐 쭉 보시면 다 트로트예요. 그런데 지금까지 언제나 7080은 저항, 청년, 대학생 이런 이야기랑 이야기가 돼 있고 트로트 따위하고는 연결이 되었지 않아 왔었는데 사실 여기 있는 거 거의 다 트로트거든요. 그리고 70년대, 80년대 트로트도 아닙니다. 대부분 그 시대를 겪어왔던 선생님들이 2000년대에 나온 것들도 있긴 하지만 대부분은 시간성도 맞지 않고 장르적으로도 거의 대부분 기존의 맥락과는 벗어납니다. 그 오른쪽에 있는 것은 제가 그 종로구에 위치한 음악사에서 찍어온 사진인데요. 좀 이따가 이 리스트를 보여드릴 것인데 7080 월드팝, 70 뭐 고고 클럽팝, 고고장의 추억 이런 것들. 자, 그 아까 말씀드렸듯이 그 내적인 음악 내적인 규정하고는 사실 맞지 않습니다. 그렇다면 이것은 처음에 7080이라는 음악은 아주 순수하게 어떤 음악적인 성질을 이야기하다가 변질이 되었거나 망한 것인가? 모든 것이 된 것인가? 라고 이야기를 한다면 물론 쉬운 이야기가 되겠지만 그렇다면 이 연구를 할 이유가 없을 것이고 근데 이제 민족지 학자로서 인류학을 전공하는 사람으로서는 이것이 어떻게 어떤 맥락에서 이렇게 변화해 왔나 혹은 이 변화 자체가 7080이라는 기호의 과정 자체이지 않을까라는 전제 하에서 이야기를 나누어 보고자 하는 것이 이 준비하고 있는 논문의 내용입니다. 연구 질문은 그렇습니다. 결국은 기호로서의 7080은 뭐냐라는 것입니다. 그리고 무엇으로 존재하여 왔는가입니다. 그리고 아까 말씀드렸던 것처럼 2000년대 초와 그러니까 이게 대중 매체 안에서 확 드러났던 것이 좀 이따 얘기하겠지만 2000년대 초 2004년경입니다. 그때와 20년 정도가 지난 현재라는 민족지적 현재 사이에 7080이 가리키는 것이 다른 정도가 아니라 완전히 전의 의미를 배반하기도 하였다는 사실은 어떠한 과정의 결과물인가라는 질문입니다. 이론적 기반은 기본적으로 인류학적인 접근이고 과정적인 접근이 되겠습니다. 그래서 기의가 그러니까 이 7080이라는 기표를 기표가 포괄하고 있는 내용이 무엇이냐에 대해서 그 의미가 계속 전이되기도 하고 의도적으로 어떤 사람들에 의해서 집단적으로 전유되기도 하고요. 아이콘화 그러니까 어떤 것들이 좀 더 본질적인 것처럼 올라오고 다른 것들은 지워지고 제가 무화라고 표현을 했지만 지워지는 거죠. 이런 종류의 과정들에 대해서 관심을 가지고 이야기하고 있고 여기에 더해서 이제 마이클 실버스틴이 이렇게 박물화 그러니까 박물관이라고 생각을 할 때 7080이라는 간판을 달고 있는 박물관이라고 생각을 할 때 그 내용을 누군가가 계속해서 새롭게 큐레이션하고 있기 때문에 이 기기가 변화하고 있다는 시각 속에서 박물화와 재박물화에 대한 이야기를 이론적인 기반으로 하여서 이 연구를 진행을 하였습니다. 그래서 소리 성질로서의 7080에서 향유자 종족으로서 7080으로 넘어갔다. 적어도 매스미디어, 주류 매스미디어 안에서는 이것이 제 지난 2025년에 발표했던 논문의 내용입니다. 지금 제가 캡처했던 요 이미지가 무엇이냐 하면 2004년 1월에 KBS 열린음악회 특집, 설 특집으로 배철수 아저씨가 특별 사회를 보셨던 그 프로그램의 오프닝입니다. 그러니까 배철수 아저씨가 아직 등장하기 전에 이게 시작하자마자 나왔던 이제 옥슨80 홍서범 아저씨가 노래를 부르고 있는데 바로 뒤에 아주 커다랗게 상징적으로 기호사적으로 아주 아름답게 7080이 빛나고 있습니다. 이때 이후로 7080은 어떤 종류의 어떤 종류의 음악을 나타내는 기호, 대표적인 기호로 자리매김을 했고 생각해 보시면 그 추후에 8090이라는 게 어떤 종류로 나오긴 했지만 그 전까지 전례가 없었던 음악, 문화, 세대 기호입니다. 그리고 2004년 초에 그래서 그와 관련된 담론들이 이제 신문 기사라든가 당시 주류 매체를 통해서 이야기가 나오게 되는데 그래서 여기 보시면 7080 콘서트는 그룹 사운드 음악이랑 연결이 됩니다. 아까 2004년 1월에 KBS에서 나왔던 그 방송도 모두 방송사 가요제 출신의 그룹 사운드들만 나왔습니다. 근데 생각해보면 그 가요제에는 그룹 사운드만 있지 않았어요. 포크 가수들도 있었고 발라드 계열, 소위 말하는 뽕짝 계열의 가수들도 있었는데 다 지워져 있죠. 그리고 그룹 사운드라는 어떤 종류의 앙상블 개념이 7080과 기호적으로 붙어 있습니다. 그리고 현재는 포크, 통기타, 어쿠스틱 기타와 연결된 장르가 7080의 아이콘처럼 되어 있지만 지금 이 담론에서만 보시듯이 포크 음악 부활의 계기가 된 것들과는 별개의 현상으로서 7080 현상이 현시되고 있습니다. 밑에 임진모 아저씨가 쓴 것도 마찬가지죠. 7080 캠퍼스 밴드의 윤기는 주류의 신세대 음악에서는 찾아볼 수 없는 로컬 콘텐츠를 하고 있다고 이야기를 하고 있고요. 그리고 무엇과 반대되는 이야기라고 이야기를 하냐면 댄스와 발라드에 젖어 있는 젊은 세대를 향한 그들 나름의 의사표시라고 하는데 이미 그들이라는 개념 자체가 어떤 종족성에 대한 어떤 전제를 하고 계신 거겠죠. 댄스와 발라드가 바깥에 있게 됩니다. 근데 아까 보셨지만 2020년대 7080 포크 댄스 발라드라고 적혀 있죠. 이것이 굉장히 큰 간극이 되겠죠. 그리고 아까 그 종로 국악사가 아니죠. 종로 음악사에 있는 그 USB 음반을 보시면 락 발라드 리믹스, 팝송 젊은 날의 추억, 포크 음악의 산실 세시봉, 신나는 팝송, 고고 앤 디스코 팝, 나이트, 크리스마스 캐롤, 그리고 토토 댄스 7080. 근데 보시면 기쁘다 구주 오셨네, 세시봉부터 시작해서 2000년대 한참 이후에 나왔던 거북이의 빙고라든가, 그죠? 화려한 싱글이라든가 DOC와 춤을 같은 것들이 적혀 있습니다. 이렇게 된다면 7080은 음악과 관련된 모든 것이면서 아무것도 아닌 기호가 되게 됩니다. 그러니까 기존에 이것은 음악적인 무엇이다라고 이야기하는 어떤 종류의 내적 실체론적인 시각이 적용이 될 수 없다라는 것이 되겠고, 오른쪽은 JTBC에서 3년 정도 됐을 겁니다. JTBC 싱어게인에서 자기를 규정하는 표현으로 나는 7080 가수다라고 20대 초반에 여성 싱어송라이터가 올라와가지고 이제 이름을 숨기고 한 거죠. 근데 이분이 했던 노래들은 사실 70년대, 80년대 노래가 하나도 없어요. 그리고 아까 말했던 비주류 청년 문화와는 관계가 없는, 예를 들면 이선희 선생님의 노래를 한다든가, 그렇죠? 최백호 선생님의 노래를 한다든가, 물론 그 시대에 있었던 분들은 맞지만, 그래서 결국은 이 불일치라는 것은 무엇인가에 대한 이야기를 해보고자 하는 것이 지난 논문의 내용이었습니다. 네, 잠깐 말을 하다가 놓쳤어요, 제가. 잠깐만요. 네. 네, 그렇습니다. 그래서 2004년 이 특집에서는 분명히 초반에 음악적으로 규정이 되고 있어요. 방송에서도 그렇게 규정을 했고, 담론적으로 이걸 받아들이는 사람도 음악적인 무엇이다, 특히 그룹 사운드란 앙상블의 형태, 록적인 음악 장르의 형태였다라고 말을 합니다. 그리고 2004년 중반쯤으로 넘어가게 되면 이것이 어떤 식으로 넘어가게 되냐면, 포크라든가 그 당대의 동료 가수들을 이제 끌어 모아서 7080 페스티벌들이 생겨납니다. 근데 적어도 2004년 가을 정도까지는 그 MBC에서 그 해에 엄청나게 큰 대한민국 음악 축제라는 걸 강원도에서 했는데, 7080은 록만 했고요. 그다음에 포크 계열의 세시봉 가수들이 다 나왔지만 그거는 전혀 다른 카테고리에 있었습니다. 그런데 2004년 말에 콘서트 7080이라는 KBS 프로그램이 나오면서부터는 이제 이야기가 조금 달라집니다. 그러니까 무슨 이야기냐 하면, 7080 콘서트 7080의 처음 모토에서 뭐라고 이야기를 하냐면, 이 프로그램은 1970년대와 80년대 20대를 보낸 세대를 겨냥한 라이브 음악 프로그램이라고 정의를 합니다. 여기엔 음악 내적인 표현이 아무것도 없어요. 다시 말씀드리면 70년대와 80년대 20대를 보낸 세대라는 사람, 종족성이 이제 더 앞에 등장을 하게 된다는 이야기입니다. 7080이 2004년 초반과 말만 해도 음악과 관련된 무엇인가 성에서 종족성으로 변화하게 되는 어떤 순간들을 이야기를 하고 있는 건데요. 7080이 다른 무엇보다도 이 사람을 의미하게 되고, 그들의 종족성이 타겟이 되고, 그들이 무엇인가를 이제 큐레이션할 권리를 가지게 된다면, 결국 7080이라는 것은 종족의 어떤 것으로서 그들이 좋아하는 모든 것이 7080의 후보가 될 수 있게 됩니다. 그러니까 전유의 권리를 가지게 된다라는 것이죠. 그래서 7080의 배타적인 소유자라고 스스로를 생각하는 세대들, 어떻게 보면은 상상된 공동체이죠. 내가 7080을 겪었어. 10대 후반에 겪었던 사람과 20대 후반에 겪었던 사람 다를 것이고, 대학생이었던 사람들과 대학 생활을 하지 않았던 사람들도 굉장히 다를 것이지만, 어쨌든 간에 자신이 그 공유되었다고 믿어지는 그 시대의 향유자라고 생각하는 사람들이 선택하고 소비하고 제구하고 전시하는 행위들을 계속해서 하게 되고, 그럼으로써 7080이라는 개념을 다시 확언하고 자신의 정체성과 붙여낼 수 있는 권리를 가지게 되었다. 기하학적으로 연결, 세미오티컬리 링크했다라는 뜻으로 말씀을 드린 거예요. 그래서 2004년으로부터 20여 년이 지난 지금에는 그렇기 때문에 그들이 1970년대와 80년대에 자신들의 음악적 취향과 삶을 그만둔 게 아니라 90년대로 넘어가고, 음악가들도 새로운 작품을 발표하고 장이 바뀌고 2000년대 들어오고 2010년, 20년대로 들어가면서 자신들의 취향이 확장된 것들을 다시 7080이라는 박물관으로 들여오고 하면서, 그 전까지는 발라드와 트로트와 댄스가 바깥에 있었지만 이제는 자연스럽게 자신들이 즐길 수 있는 종류의 댄스와 발라드라든가 트로트와 같은 것들이 박물화와 재박물화의 과정으로 들어오게 되었다는 이야기고, 그래서 오른쪽에 이 7080과 관련된 노래방, 퇴진 노래방을 보시면 떼시봉은 오히려 7080 바깥에 있어요. 이 카테고리 밖에 있고요. 7080 청춘클럽 보시면 제가 한번 캡처를 한 건데 지금 샵에 가까이 유승준의 가위 같은 게 있습니다. 뱅크에 가질 수 없는 너가 있습니다. 어떤 방식으로든 기존의 7080과 시간적인 의미로든 음악 내적인 의미로든 아무런 관계가 없는 것들이지만 7080을 겪었던 사람들이 자신들이 수용해 왔던 것들을 계속해서 확장한 결과물이라는 거죠. 그런 이야기가 이제 2025년에 나왔던 논문이니까 제가 지금 말을 잘 못하기 때문에 그걸 읽으시면 내용이 나올 것 같습니다. 그리고 이제 조금 더 확장할 수 있는 이야기는 이것입니다. 지금까지는 2004년에 아까 그 홍서범 아저씨와 함께 보여드렸던 커다란 기호, 그러니까 주류 매체를 통해서 임팩트가 생겨나고 그 다음부터 이제 영향력을 대중에게 끼쳤던 이 이야기를 했는데, 사실 보시면 이게 그 행정 데이터베이스 검색해 보면 1990년대 초반부터 7080이라는 종류의 공간이 먼저 있습니다. 그냥 7080들이 있어요. 7080 뭐뭐가 아니라 7080이라는 거는 그냥 장소의 장르였다라는 식의 이야기들을 그 당시 사람들에게 들을 수가 있습니다. 그러니까 매스미디어 이전에 이것이 있었고 이 기호가 있었고, 어떻게 보면 그 매스미디어 이후에 음악 내적인 이야기든 종족성이든 그것들의 이전에 있었지만 없어진 역사라는 이야기를 하고 있는 거죠. 7080 여고 동창생이라든가 7080 쉘브르 뭐 이런 것들이 있죠. 그래서 제가 7080을 운영하기도 하셨고 1980년대 초반에 가요제 출신이셨던, 그러니까 MBC 가요제 출신이셨던 선생님과 인터뷰를 했었는데, 이분이 이제 표현하기로는 이렇습니다. 부산이나 저 밑에 쪽에서 나이트도 아니고 카바레도 아니고 이런 종류의 것들이 7080이었다. 근데 이것들은 원래 밴드들이 음악을 하던 공간이었다는 거예요. 그러니까 여기서 말하는 사람들은 연행자들인 거죠. 그러니까 수용자나 향유자의 문제가 아니라 대중매체 이전에 원래 캬바레나 룸살롱이나 나이트클럽 말고는 아무 데서도, 방송에서도 당연히 록은 불러줄 일이 별로 없었으니까 게다가 이제 종로라든가 명동에서 이제 사람들이 많이 알고 있는 그런 무대들에서 할 수 있는 어쿠스틱한 종류의 음악을 하는 송라이터들과는 다르게 이제 주로 이런 종류의 업소들에서 밖에는 자신들의 음악생활을 영위할 수 없었던 사람들이 생계를 위해서 자신들의 공간을 만들고 그 안에서 그 맥락 속에서 무대를 크게 만들고 거기서 자신이 연주하기 위한 공간이 원래는 7080으로 먼저 선재했다라는 것이고요. 그 다음에 아까 계속해서 부산에서부터 시작해서 올라왔다라는 이야기를 하는데, 그렇다면 대중매체 중심의 이야기, 중앙에서부터 전국으로 퍼져나갔다는 내러티브와는 반대되는 어떤 종류의 현상이 있었다라는 이야기죠. 물론 이분과의 인터뷰를 제가 길게 하기는 했지만 뭐 이분의 것이 모든 어떤 현상 자체를 보여주는 것은 아니겠죠. 하지만 적어도 이런 현상이 있었다라는 사실, 그리고 이것들이 탈각되었다는 사실 정도는 이야기할 수 있을 것 같아요. 그래서 이게 마지막으로 이야기하게 되는 결과물입니다. 정리한 결과물이고요. 기호의 전이와 전후의 역동적인 과정으로 7080을 살펴볼 때 1990년대 초반에는 이게 가장 검정색으로 되어 있는 동그라미가 가장 중심 기의가 있었던 영역이라는 거고요. 그리고 이제 겹으로 되어 있는 원이 그 한 영역 안에서 중심이 되어 있던 것이고, 그래서 예를 들면 처음엔 음악가가 연행하는 장소가 7080이었다가 대중매체로 넘어오면서 그것들은 지워지고 그룹 사운드, 록 음악이 중심, 소리성이 중심이 되었고, 그러다가 이제 바로 향유자들에게 넘어가고요. 그 권리가 넘어가면서 7080의 의미가 전격적으로 바뀌기 시작을 했고, 이제 이 인터뷰 이의 얘기에 따르면 2009년, 2010년 정도로 이제 얘기를 하더라고요. 그러면서 이제는 장소 자체도 7080이라는 공간 자체도 연행자들이 이제 노래방 좋아하는 한국인들에게 뺏겼다라고 표현을 하거든요. 그래서 결국은 연행자성이 사라지게 되고 음악적으로도 이제 70년대와 80년대와는 관계없는 레퍼토리들이 이제 이 7080이라는 기표에 포함이 되게 되면서 1990년 초반에 있는 표와 맨 마지막 현재라고 제가 적어놓은 이 표는 완전히 다른 의미의 박물관을 이루고 있다라는 이야기가 제가 현재까지 탐구하고 있는 이 기호의 사회문화사입니다. 네, 발표 여기까지 하겠습니다.
네, 감사합니다.
네, 네.
주시고요. 예, 다음은 마지막 발표인데요. 예, 제가 발표를 할 이게 제가 이렇게 시간을 잘 질문이 이미 질문이 이미 나와 있는데 요거를 뭐 지금 이 세션에서 그냥 이 질문에 대한 답변을 듣는 식으로 할지 아니면 잠깐 쉬었다가 종합 토론에서 이 이야기들을 끌고 가서 하면 좋을지 어떻게 생각하시나요? 잠깐. 예, 그러면 저희가 10분만 쉬었다가 10분 후에 45분부터 종합 토론에서 지금 채팅창에 올라와 있는 질문들을 종합해서 같이 이야기 나누도록 하겠습니다. 예, 저희 세 번째 세션을 여기서 마치도록 하겠습니다. 10분 뒤에 뵙겠습니다. 감사합니다.